Hi guys. Tonight we take a slow walk back into a world where the air is sharp enough to sting your lungs, the walls are ancient stone, and the solemn job of keeping watch in the dark might just cost you your fingers if you're careless. You're standing at the base of a medieval castle tower. Torchlight flickers erratically above you, as the wind whistles a mournful tune through gaps in the battlements. The stones under your boots are icy, the kind of profound cold that seeps straight into the bones. You probably won't survive this night if you don't think ahead. So, before you get comfortable, take a quiet moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Now, dim the lights. Let your eyes grow heavy, and imagine yourself trudging up those spiral steps, each one colder than the last, until you reach the guard post high above the still courtyard. The first thing you notice is the stillness. A medieval castle, after dark, is quieter than you might expect, yet it is never truly silent. In their stalls, horses snort restlessly, dogs growl faintly when the wind shifts its direction, and from the kitchens far below, the lingering ghost of charred meat still drifts on the air. The sentry you are replacing rubs his arms briskly, his teeth chattering as he gives you a stark warning. Keep moving, or the cold will eat you alive. And that is no exaggeration. In an age before central heating, even the most lavish castle was a drafty, cold shell compared to what you know today. Guards on duty lived with the chilling knowledge that a cold night could be just as lethal as an enemy's arrow. So, how did they manage to snatch moments of sleep, to keep just warm enough that sheer exhaustion didn't overtake them? One mainstream historical fact is that castles were engineered for defense, not for comfort. Their thick stone walls did insulate against the sun's heat in summer, but they also trapped an icy dampness throughout the winter. Those stones bled a relentless chill into every room. Modern engineers measuring temperatures in preserved keeps have found that even with a roaring fire, the upper chambers rarely rose above what you might consider a brisk spring morning. But here's a quirky tidbit. Guards sometimes tucked hot stones, carefully wrapped in cloth, into their bedding. A medieval version of your hot water bottle. The trick only lasted an hour or two, but it provided just enough warmth for a soldier to drift off before his body had to adjust. The stones were heated in the kitchens or hearths, then carried upstairs with caution to avoid burns. Imagine clutching one under layers of rough wool, the precious heat fading slowly as your dreams begin. Historians still argue whether night watchmen truly slept inside their posts, or if strict captains demanded that they remain standing, pacing to stay alert. Written orders often forbid dozing, yet numerous accounts describe men found curled in corners, cloaks pulled over their heads. It seems that fatigue always found a way, and when it did, guards developed a whole arsenal of strategies to survive the bitter air. Close your eyes now, and picture a narrow guard room at the very top of a tower. Two figures are huddled together on a straw mattress that has been pushed flush against the wall. They are still in their boots, their cloaks wrapped as tightly as shrouds. The mattress itself is pitifully thin, the straw within flattened after weeks of use, yet it lifts them just enough off the stone floor to keep from losing the entirety of their warmth. Above them, a tiny slit in the wall admits a faint, persistent draft, just enough to whistle softly, like a distant, mournful flute. One man pulls his hood low over his face, a futile gesture against the cold. The other murmurs a quiet prayer against frostbite. Their breaths mingle in the half-darkness, forming little clouds that drift and then vanish. The sensation of cold here is not dramatic, not the kind that freezes you instantly. It is relentless, a slow, creeping numbness that works its way inward. Fingers begin to stiffen, toes start to ache, and every single gust that slips through the cracks feels like the touch of an invisible thief, stealing your precious body heat. You shift under your cloak, searching desperately for a position where the chill doesn't gnaw at your very bones. Your companion rolls closer, and you allow it without a word of complaint. Warmth is warmth. Pride be damned. The rhythm of the castle itself is what helps you rest. Bells mark the passing hours. The soft clank of chains signals that a drawbridge is being checked. The occasional, sharp bark of a dog echoes from the courtyard below. Each sound reassures you that life continues on outside your small, fragile cocoon. You tuck your hands deep into your armpits, breathe against the rough wool of your cloak, and count your own heartbeats. For a little while, you manage to forget the cold. Some guards, of course, had it much worse. Those stationed atop exposed walls where no fire could possibly be lit. There, men might stamp their feet constantly, swinging their arms in great circles just to keep the blood flowing. Those poor souls often slept only in brief snatches when they were relieved, sometimes collapsing onto bare, unforgiving planks. The lucky ones rotated quickly, an hour or two awake, then a precious chance to warm up near a brazier in the tower room. But the unlucky watchman lingered far longer, and stories abound of men found stiff, frozen mid-shift. Whether all of these tales are true or merely embellished, they remind you just how thin the margin was between life and death on a medieval night. In such a place, every single detail mattered. The way you layered your tunic and woolen shirt, whether your boots were properly stuffed with dry straw. If you remembered to pull the bedding all the way up to your chin, forget one simple step and you might wake with frost on your eyebrows, or with a deep, rattling cough that never quite left your lungs. Even now, archaeologists studying castle remains sometimes find soot traces in the most unexpected corners, hinting that fires were lit where official rules strictly said they shouldn't be. That soot is a silent testimony to desperate men who chose the risk of fire over the certainty of freezing. As you imagine yourself settling in, the stone pressing its immense cold through the meager straw beneath you, think about how fragile comfort truly was. No feather mattress, no sealed glass window, no thermostat waiting for your touch. There are just layers of wool, a fading hot stone, and the undeniable closeness of another guard breathing quietly beside you. You pull your cloak tighter, listen to the mournful sigh of the wind through the arrow slits, and drift slowly, reluctantly, into an uneasy sleep. You wake in that half-dreamy state where you're not quite sure if the cold is deep inside your bones or only brushing along your skin. The guard captain has already come and gone, leaving behind only the fading echo of his boots on the stone steps. What lingers now, what is always present, is the draught. Every medieval castle, no matter how noble, was plagued by it. You can imagine a grand hall full of banners, the kind you see in films, but the truth is that the walls were not sealed like modern brickwork. They breathed. They leaked. And for a guard trying to sleep, those drafty cracks were not just an inconvenience, they were a relentless torment. A mainstream historical fact is that castles were built for defense above all else. Their thick stone walls, often 2 or 3 meters across at the base, were designed to resist catapults, not the biting winter winds. You might think those stones acted as insulation, but they behaved more like a vast sponge, soaking up the cold and then slowly radiating it inward. On damp nights, moisture would cling to the masonry, so that a wall would almost seem to sweat, chilling anyone who dared to lean against it. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some guards jammed moss or even wool scraps into the gaps between stones to block the drafts. It wasn't elegant, and it certainly wasn't in any building manual, but those improvised patches of insulation turned icy gusts into tolerable whispers. Imagine crouching down with a lump of sheep's wool in your hand, stuffing it into a crack with the same desperate focus as a squirrel hiding a nut, hoping it might save your toes from another freezing night. Still, historians continue to debate whether the draftiness was worse in the towers or in the great halls. Some argue the halls, with their cavernous ceilings, lost heat far more quickly. Others insist the towers, exposed on all sides to the wind, were harsher. In truth, both could be brutal. You can almost hear the sharp whistle of air through a murder hole, or the low hiss through an unshuttered arrow slit. As you lie on your bedding, the rushes beneath you shift with each intrusive breeze, carrying the smell of damp straw and the faint, lingering aroma of last week's spilled ale. It is not an unpleasant smell, exactly, but an earthy one, reminding you that any comfort here is fragile. You tuck your cloak closer and pull your hood lower over your ears, yet the draft still finds you. It snakes along your neck, it teases at your ankles, and it makes you shiver in spite of yourself. The sensory world is intensely alive around you. A rat scurries in the corner, its tiny nails ticking lightly on the stone. Somewhere far below, a door creaks as a sleepy cook stirs the banked fire in the kitchen. From your narrow slit window, the faintest moonlight spills in, silvering the dust motes dancing in the air. You shift, press your back against the wall, and instantly regret it. The stone is colder than your bedding. You roll away quickly, muttering a curse under your breath. Practical men found ways to cheat the draft. Hanging heavy cloth along the walls, even in humble guardrooms, could create a vital buffer zone. Thick tapestries served the nobility, but for soldiers, it might be nothing more than rough woolen blankets nailed at the corners. The difference between bare stone and fabric was enormous. The cloth captured heat from breath and bodies, softening the air just enough. Without it, the draft licked along every single seam, and you realize that it is not the raw strength of the cold that wears you down, but its sheer persistence. It never stops. A gust at midnight, another at 2. By dawn, it feels as though the chill has been dripping into you for hours, drop by drop, like a leaking roof slowly soaking through your cloak. Close your eyes now and imagine the rhythm. Gust, sigh, shiver, shift, over and over again. You doze, you wake, you turn, and you drift again. The draft keeps you from plunging into a deep, restorative sleep, but it also becomes part of the castle's very voice, reminding you that you are never entirely sheltered. The castle itself seems to whisper in your ear, as if saying, "You may guard me, but I decide how warm you stay." There's another thought that slips in. Perhaps not every guard dreaded the draft equally. Some men, hardened by years of outdoor labor before they ever joined a garrison, might have found the stone room no worse than a windswept field. Others, raised in warmer lands and now stationed far from home, may have cursed the northern winds more bitterly than any sword wound. Historians still puzzle over these personal differences because the records speak of punishments for sleeping on watch, but they rarely tell us how a man actually felt about the cold gnawing at him each and every night. So you tuck yourself tighter. Imagine stuffing moss into a crack with your own fingers, and pull the cloak over your face until only your nose peeks out for air. The stone sighs, the draft continues its endless song, and your body finally yields to exhaustion. Sleep comes, shallow but steady, carrying you further into the long night where even your dreams carry the haunting echo of whistling wind through drafty cracks. You stir awake, rubbing your arms as if the friction alone could summon heat, and you reach for the layers that keep you from shivering yourself into misery. In a place utterly devoid of central heating, your greatest defense is what you wear and precisely how you arrange it. A well-documented reality of the age is that medieval people were absolute masters of layering. A guard might begin with a simple linen shirt against his skin, then add a woolen tunic over that, and on top of it all, perhaps another cloak thrown across his shoulders. Each piece on its own was modest, but when stacked together, they created a formidable patchwork shield against the night. There is something rather unexpected in the way clothing so often doubled as bedding. Soldiers frequently slept without removing much of their outerwear at all. Boots stayed on, hoods remained pulled tight, and belts were loosened only slightly. In fact, some men carried their spare garments not in chests, but draped around them as they slept. Imagine nodding off in your full kit, every layer stiff with sweat and smoke, yet feeling an intense gratitude because each stitch held in another precious breath of warmth. And yet, scholars remain divided about just how effective these layers truly were. Some argue that coarse medieval wool, thicker and far oilier than the refined cloth you might picture, was nearly waterproof and excellent at trapping heat. Others point out that dampness could ruin it quickly, leaving guards with sodden, heavy tunics that chilled them even further. Perhaps the truth, as it often does, lies somewhere in between. A man who managed to keep his gear dry slept tolerably, while one caught in a downpour suffered all night long. Close your eyes now and feel the distinct scratch of homespun wool against your skin. It is not soft like modern sweaters, but coarse, with rough fibers that itch at the neck. You tug at the collar, wishing for a moment of comfort, but you know this constant scratch is the price of warmth. Over it hangs another layer, heavier, carrying the faint, oily smell of sheep that is still embedded deep within its fibers. You burrow down, pulling a cloak overhead, and the scratch slowly transforms into a protective cocoon. The sensory world of such clothing was layered not just in fabric but in raw experience. The linen carried the sharp smell of lye from a harsh washing. The wool smelled of lanolin and the smoke from the last watchfire. Leather straps creaked faintly as you shifted position. To a tired guard, these smells and sounds became as familiar as lullabies, small, intimate reminders of his protection against the cold. It is easy for us to think of clothing as fashion, but here it is purely survival. The layers turn your body into its own furnace, with each garment trapping a thin pocket of air warmed by your breath and your blood. You curl tighter, conserving that precious warmth, and listen to the faint breathing of another man across the chamber doing the very same thing. One more detail to consider. Not all guards had equal access to these layers. Wealthier soldiers or those in the retinues of nobles might be issued fine, lined cloaks trimmed with fur. Poorer men had to make do with what they owned, sometimes patching old rags together to mimic a proper tunic. Imagine two men sharing a watch, one wrapped in a fine, heavy cloak, the other in a threadbare shirt, and picture how differently they must have felt the piercing bite of the night air. Even so, the principle of layering worked for both. Add one piece, and you trap a little more warmth. Remove one, and you invited the night right in. So, you tuck your hands deep into your sleeves, pull the hood down to shadow your face, and curl up under your layered armor of cloth. The wind whispers outside, but for a moment, you are safe, wrapped in the slow, steady warmth that only many layers can build. You stir again, this time pressing your face against something softer than wool, something more primal. It is a pelt, heavy and faintly musky. This is what happens when linen and wool are not enough. Animal skins step in as nature's own perfect insulation. From fox to bear, from sheep to deer, hides were pulled into guard rooms and draped over shivering bodies like a warrior's last defense. Chronicles consistently mention that fur cloaks were prized possessions for any soldier who could get one, not only for their superior warmth, but also for the status they signaled. A thick wolf pelt thrown across your shoulders did more than just keep you alive. It told others that you were not just any watchman, but one with either means or considerable luck. There's something rather curious about how far men would go to secure such a comfort. Accounts survive of guards stripping hides from recently hunted game and throwing them, still bloody and stiff, directly onto their bedding for insulation. Imagine lying under a half-cured deerskin, the smell pungent and the texture rough against you, yet knowing that its presence meant you would wake up alive. It was not elegant, it was not fragrant, but it was practical in the most desperate and essential way. A debate lingers among modern historians about whether fur was common among ordinary garrisons or largely reserved for nobles and their elite household guards. Some argue that pelts were abundant in colder regions, making them available to nearly everyone. Others maintain that common soldiers had little chance of owning fine furs, relying instead on patched-together scraps of hide or second-hand pieces. The truth may have varied by region and circumstance, but the deep yearning for the warmth of fur was universal. As you close your eyes, picture yourself burrowing under a sheepskin. The wool side faces inward, scratchy but undeniably warm, while the stiff leather side faces out, a barrier against the damp. You inhale, catching a faint lanolin tang mixed with the smoke from last night's hearth. The weight of it presses down pleasantly, a constant reminder that nature itself is wrapping you like a blanket. The sensory impression is powerful. Your fingers trace the uneven surface of a tanned hide, feeling the rough patches alternating with softer tufts. The pelt smells of earth, of animal life, of raw survival. You think briefly of the creature it once belonged to, then let the thought fade as your own breath fogs in the dark chamber. In some castles, records note that guards even used furs stolen from defeated foes. A pelt taken from an enemy's camp might later serve as bedding in a drafty tower. It was a trophy, perhaps, but more importantly, it was a lifesaver on a frigid night. Here, the boundary between luxury and necessity became blurred. Fur was both wealth and warmth, dignity and defense. Not every soldier had access to a pelt, of course. The less fortunate curled beneath nothing more than straw and wool, envying the man beside him who was wrapped in a fox fur blanket. Yet the principle remained the same. Animal skins gave life when the cold stone walls threatened to steal it away. So you pull the pelt tighter around you, letting its weight anchor you, muffling the low moans of the wind outside. For a few blessed hours, you sink into a deeper, more profound slumber, trusting that the warmth of an animal long gone will carry you safely through until dawn's pale light creeps over the battlements. You shift again, this time against something crinkly and uneven. It rustles with a dry whisper under your weight and releases a smell so profoundly earthy you could almost be lying in a barn. That's because you are resting on one of the most common sleeping arrangements for guards in medieval castles: rushes, straw, or hay, spread across a simple wooden frame or, more often, laid directly on the cold flagstones. Chroniclers consistently described that the garrison slept on makeshift pallets, stuffed with whatever dry vegetation was available, changed only occasionally, and left to flatten under the weight of weeks of weary bodies. It's worth pausing to consider what these rustic beds were actually like. A proper wooden bedstead was a luxury few could imagine. Many guards knew only a crude sack stuffed with straw, an item sometimes called a palliasse. The sack itself might be stitched from rough linen or canvas, and once filled, it was tied shut and simply laid on the floor. At first, the straw would crunch softly, providing a bit of spring and some insulation from the stones beneath. But with each passing night, it compacted, until eventually you were lying on a dense, lumpy mat that felt more like a pile of sticks than a bed. Some men tried to solve this by topping it with fresh rushes every few nights, though in poorer garrisons the same bedding lingered for months, becoming musty, alive with insects, and hardly restful at all. Something rather curious appears in a few records. Guards would sometimes mix dried herbs into their bedding. Lavender, mint, or wormwood was scattered among the straw, partly to mask the ever-present musty smell and partly to ward off pests. Imagine crawling into your straw sack, tired to the very bone, and being greeted by the faint, calming scent of lavender. A small, humanizing comfort in a world otherwise defined by cold stone and creaking wood. Whether it truly worked against lice or not, the fragrance was a kind of psychological blanket, soothing enough to let sleep finally come. But modern experts disagree about how hygienic these arrangements truly were. Some argue that since rushes were replaced regularly in the great halls and some guard chambers, the bedding remained tolerable. Others maintain that guards rarely had the luxury of frequent replacement, leaving them to sleep amid damp, flea-ridden straw. The scholarly consensus is far from settled, primarily because written sources often ignore the mundane details of a lowly soldier's bed. Archaeology can only offer us whispers and hints, pollen residues found in castle floors, suggesting the kinds of plants that were brought indoors. Close your eyes now and imagine yourself lying on such bedding. The straw crackles with a dry insistence as you shift, each sharp stem poking stubbornly into your side or scratching the skin beneath your tunic. The smell is rich and layered, a mixture of earth, dried grass, and a faint animal musk. You tug your cloak tighter, using it as a blanket, and feel the straw prickle through the weave. There is no feather bed softness here, no even surface. There are only lumps that press into you, reshaped again and again as your tired body seeks a comfortable hollow. The sensory experience is vivid. Your ear rests against the straw, and you can hear the faint hiss of it shifting with each breath you take. Tiny fragments of stalk cling to your hair. Dust rises when you cough, catching in the back of your throat. Yet, despite all this discomfort, a slow warmth seeps slowly upward. The straw, as thin as it seems, lifts you just off the stone, preventing the relentless chill of the floor from draining all your heat. It is imperfect, yes, but it is also survival itself. In the corner, another guard mutters in his sleep, turning heavily on his own pallet. You can hear the straw beneath him sigh and shift, then fall silent once more. Around you, the room smells of sweat, wool, and the grassy bedding. For a fleeting moment, you could almost imagine yourself in a hayloft back on the farm rather than inside a fortress built for war. That familiarity is comforting. Some guard rooms were placed near storerooms or granaries, meaning fresh straw was readily available. In such cases, bedding might be replenished often, giving soldiers a slightly better chance of avoiding pests. Others, stationed in remote towers, had to make do with whatever dry rushes could be cut from the marshes nearby. In winter, when gathering was difficult, the precious straw beds grew thin and compressed, and guards huddled even closer together for warmth. The arrangement of bedding could vary too. Sometimes, straw was spread directly on the floor in great communal piles. Guards would collapse into them shoulder to shoulder, cloaks pulled over their heads, in a scene that looked more like a kennel than a barracks. At other times, individuals had their own sacks, slightly more private, but still far from luxurious. In either case, the constant sound of rustling filled the chamber each time someone moved. It is easy to forget that straw bedding also carried a powerful symbolic weight. In the medieval imagination, straw was associated with humility and hardship. Jesus was said to have been born among it. Peasants lived their whole lives upon it, and soldiers resting on it embodied a kind of sacrifice. To lie on straw was to be reminded of your station in the grand order of things. You were not noble, not royal, but one of the countless men keeping watch, half forgotten in the footnotes of history. One peculiar note comes from a French chronicle describing guards tossing their straw out the window after a siege, believing that the bedding had absorbed the bad spirits of hunger and fear. Was this pure superstition, or simply a practical way to rid themselves of fleas? Perhaps it was both. Superstition often mingled with practicality, and in this case, the ritual cleansing also meant fresher bedding for the next night. As you drift on your own lumpy mattress, the uneven comfort begins to shape your dreams. Sometimes you imagine yourself on a meadow under the stars, the straw crackling beneath you like summer grass. Other times, you feel the immense weight of the stone walls pressing in, and the straw seems no more than a fragile shield against the cold, hard earth. Yet always, it is what stands between you and freezing. Think about that as you curl tighter. Every stalk matters. Every handful piled beneath you is one more barrier against the hungry chill of the stone. You close your eyes, listen to the rustle, and let the uneven rhythm of the straw lull you back into the uneasy but essential sleep of a medieval guard. You roll over, and this time what saves you from the onset of a violent shiver isn't straw, nor wool, nor fur. It's the simple, undeniable warmth of another human body pressed close by. For all the layers and bedding in the world, sometimes the only true shield against the medieval chill was another person. Chronicles often remind us that soldiers rarely slept alone, especially within the confines of a guard room. Whether in pairs or in larger groups, men would huddle together out of pure necessity, letting their collective body heat mingle and coalesce under shared cloaks or blankets. It might feel profoundly awkward by modern standards, but in the heart of a frozen tower, personal pride had very little place. One well-documented reality is that communal sleeping was a standard practice across medieval society, not just among guards. Families in peasant huts piled into the same bed, with children tucked carefully between their parents to maximize warmth. In roadside inns, strangers often slept side by side, sometimes with nothing separating them but a single thin sheet. The guards simply followed the same time-honored pattern. You can picture 2 or 3 soldiers wrapped together in one large blanket, their shoulders touching, their legs tangled, all breathing the same frosty air, but finding a deep, primal comfort in each other's presence. An odd little custom worth noting is the bundling cloak. Instead of each man having his own, 2 guards would wrap themselves together in one oversized cloak, binding it tight with a belt, so that neither could roll away and break the seal of warmth. Imagine trying to sleep that way, your face pressed against another man's shoulder, sharing his breath, hearing every single snore, but also knowing with absolute certainty that this shared heat meant survival. If you drifted a little closer in the dead of night, no one complained. Better to be cramped than frozen. Academic circles have long disagreed about how common this practice truly was among professional garrisons. Some argue it was universal, citing accounts from northern Europe where temperatures regularly dropped below freezing even inside castle walls. Others suggest that while peasants and poor soldiers may have shared bedding, elite guards, especially those in noble households, were given individual pallets for the sake of both dignity and discipline. Yet even in noble circles, stories survive of nights spent sleeping 2 or 3 to a bed while out on campaign. So perhaps the line between necessity and choice simply blurred when the cold truly set in. Picture the scene: a small guard chamber, its only light the deep red glow of a dying brazier. 4 men lie side by side on straw mats, their cloaks overlapping to form a single covering. One mutters in his sleep, another coughs softly. Their shoulders touch, their knees bump, their arms occasionally brush. The air smells of sweat, oiled leather, and damp wool. But in the close press of their bodies, there is a profound comfort. Outside, the wind howls through the arrow slits, but inside, you feel a small bubble of warmth where breath and body have merged. The sensation of shared warmth is unlike anything else. You feel it first at the points of direct contact where a comrade's arm brushes against yours, where his knee presses lightly against your side. Slowly, that heat radiates, filling the small space between you, softening the icy air. The sound of his steady breathing becomes a kind of lullaby, constant and reassuring. You close your eyes, and for the first time tonight, you almost forget the immense stone walls that surround you. There's also the matter of safety. Sleeping together didn't just keep men warm, it kept them alert. If one stirred restlessly, the others would notice. If someone grew dangerously cold in their sleep, his companions could shake him awake, preventing frostbite or something far worse. In this way, shared warmth doubled as an unspoken system of mutual protection. You were never entirely alone in the night watch. Some descriptions even hint at guards sleeping with their dogs pressed against them, the animals tucked under the blankets just like comrades. A dog's body heat was considerable, and its low growl at the slightest disturbance made it an ideal bedfellow. Between men and animals, the practice of bundling together created a living, breathing furnace in the draftiest tower. Not every soldier welcomed it, of course. Imagine being crammed between 2 thunderous snorers after a long day of drilling. The straw beneath you rustles with every movement. The cloaks above you shift, and you can't roll away without losing that precious, hard-won warmth. It is claustrophobic, uncomfortable, and at times deeply undignified. Yet most accepted it, because the alternative solitude in the biting cold was far, far worse. The psychology of such closeness mattered immensely too. In a time when camaraderie was the very backbone of survival, sleeping shoulder to shoulder built an unbreakable trust. You depended on each other not just with swords in the daylight, but with shared body heat in the dark. Bonds were forged in that quiet proximity, in the silent hours when men breathed the same air and endured the same discomforts. That intimacy, however unromantic, was an essential part of the soldier's life. And so you close your eyes again, letting the weight of another's arm brush against yours, feeling his warmth seeping through the layers of cloth. The cold hasn't vanished, but it has retreated to the corners of the room, pushed back by the shared furnace of human bodies. You drift, half listening to the snores and the murmurs, knowing that in this small cocoon of comradeship you will not freeze tonight. For a fleeting moment you even feel grateful. Grateful for the awkward closeness, for the scratchy cloaks, for the breath of another man on your cheek, because all of it means life. In the long history of guard rooms, this simple act of bundling together saved countless lives, even if few chroniclers ever cared enough to write it down in detail. So you tuck your cloak tighter around both of you, surrender to the gentle rhythm of shared breathing, and let sleep claim you once more, carried on the warmth of comradeship that no draught can ever fully extinguish. The warmth of comrades fades as the watch bell sounds its cold, metallic summons again, and you shift your body toward another form of comfort. It is the glowing heart of a portable fire. In the darkest guard chambers of a medieval castle, where the stone pressed in like an icy tomb, the humble brazier or coal pan stood as a stubborn, living spark against the oppressive cold. We know from surviving castle inventories that such portable heat sources were not rare. Braziers of iron or bronze, filled with a belly of glowing coals, could be carried carefully up winding stairs to the guard rooms, where men would gather around them as moths to a candle's flame. Something rather unexpected in the historical record is that these braziers were sometimes nothing more than a simple bucket of sand with hot coals poured on top. A soldier could drag this crude furnace into his corner, set his boots near it, and pray the embers glowed long enough to thaw his frozen toes. Yet this simple convenience carried with it a profound peril. A coal pan could smoulder too long, filling a closed chamber with choking, acrid smoke, or worse, catch the dry rushes on fire. Imagine drifting into an uneasy sleep and waking to the snap of sparks in the straw right beside you, a primal terror mixing with the biting cold in a single, frantic heartbeat. The scholarly consensus is far from settled on how widely such braziers were truly allowed in towers. Some historians argue that captains banned them outright in guard posts, fearing fire far more than they feared frost. Others insist that portable heat was absolutely essential in northern climates, governed by strict rules about tending the flames safely. Yet the archaeological traces, scorch marks on tower floors, tiny bits of ash lodged deep in cracks, suggest that rules or no rules, soldiers often risked the glow. Picture the scene. The guard chamber is almost completely dark, save for the faint, deep red light emanating from the brazier's belly. Long, distorted shadows crawl along the walls, thrown by the trembling coals. 4 men cluster around it, their hands stretched forward, their breath catching white in the still air. The brazier pops softly as a coal shifts, releasing a thin whiff of smoke. The warmth it offers is meager, barely enough to chase the sharpest edge from the chill. But in this place, at this hour, it feels like summer itself. You crouch closer, extending your numb fingers until they sting with the painful return of blood. The iron brazier radiates a harsh metallic heat that prickles your skin. You shift your boots nearer, the damp leather steaming faintly where it meets the fire's influence. The chamber smells of smoke and hot iron, layered over the ever-present scent of damp stone. Your ears catch the occasional sharp hiss as a guard spits onto a glowing coal for sport, the vapor rising like a fleeting ghost in the air. Some guard rooms made use of more elaborate braziers. Wealthier castles issued pans with perforated lids, cleverly designed to contain sparks and reduce the inherent danger. Others simply relied on whatever vessel was at hand. An old cooking pot, a broken shield hammered into the shape of a bowl, even a flat slab of stone on which the embers were carefully spread. Innovation was born of necessity, not a desire for comfort. Yet the fire was always double-edged. Men spoke of companions who succumbed not to the frost, but to smoke inhalation, especially when the chambers were shut tight against the wind. Too little draught, and the brazier could suffocate everyone in their sleep. Too much, and the precious coals burned out far too quickly. The balance was delicate, a silent gamble taken each and every night. Still, imagine how that simple glow must have felt in the bleak midwinter. A brazier not only gave heat, it gave light. In an age where the darkness pressed in with an almost physical weight, the sight of red coals glowing in the corner offered a vital psychological anchor. Guards could doze with their eyes half open, reassured by the steady, living pulse of the fire. Without it, the blackness of a stone tower was absolute, a void that chilled both the body and the mind. There's an odd superstition recorded in a few sources. Some soldiers believed that if a coal jumped from the brazier and landed near you while you slept, it foretold an enemy attack before dawn. Was this pure coincidence, or a way of giving meaning to the random danger of sparks? Either way, you can picture the guards muttering quiet prayers over the embers, half fearing the glow as much as they cherished it. The sensory impression lingers. Your hands hover above the coals, your palms tingling, your face warmed on one side while the other remains cold. The firelight flickers against your eyelids as you doze. Every so often, you stir to poke the embers with an iron rod, sending sparks sailing upward like brief, captured stars in the enclosed night. The brazier crackles faintly, and you sink deeper into its hypnotic glow. There is camaraderie here, too. Around this fire, men tell stories, sing softly, or grumble about their rations. The brazier becomes a temporary hearth, a central point of fellowship. Laughter rises, muffled but warm, as if the flames themselves have coaxed out the human voices. You tuck your cloak around your shoulders, lean nearer, and feel both your body and your spirit begin to ease. And yet, the danger never fully disappears. You think of the rushes spread across the floor, dry as tinder. You think of the ancient wooden beams above you, creaking in the draught. A single stray spark, one careless boot, and the fire would devour the chamber faster than the cold ever could. It is a fragile, delicate balance, fire against frost, life against hazard. As your eyes grow heavy, you lie back on your straw pallet. the brazier still glowing in the corner. The shadows sway gently against the walls, breathing in time with the embers. The warmth reaches you in faint, subtle waves, just enough to soften the hard stone beneath your body. You know it will fade before morning, that you will wake to the cold once again. But for now, lulled by the soft glow and the gentle hiss of the coals, you surrender to sleep, grateful for this borrowed warmth in a world built of chill stone and bitter draughts. You open your eyes to find the brazier has burned low, now little more than a whisper of grey ash glowing faintly in its iron pan. The deep chill of the chamber immediately begins to reclaim its territory, wrapping around you like an unwelcome shroud. This time, however, your thoughts turn toward a more permanent bastion against the cold. The fixed hearths, carved directly into the stone itself. Those recessed fireplaces built into the very bones of the castle walls. Medieval builders knew the cold was a constant and cunning enemy, so they attempted, however imperfectly, to fight it with the promise of permanent fire. Surviving records show that great halls almost always had vast hearths, some large enough to roast an entire ox, while smaller chambers, including some designated guardrooms, had narrow wall niches where smoke was meant to curl up through integrated chimneys. A firmly established fact is that these hearths fundamentally changed the way men experienced winter inside a castle's walls. Instead of gathering around a small, dangerous brazier, guards could now bask in the wider, more generous heat of a real fireplace, where flames leapt high and cast a living light across the chamber. The hearth also doubled as a makeshift cook spot, its embers perfect for roasting a piece of meat or heating spiced wine. For a sentry returning from a long shift on the battlements, the sight of a glowing hearth meant far more than just warmth. It meant food, it meant light, and it meant the deeply comforting promise of survival. But there's something rather unexpected when you truly picture how these hearths actually performed. Unlike modern fireplaces, many medieval versions had no proper, efficient chimneys. Instead, the smoke simply drifted upward through a hole in the roof or out through a small vent in the wall. This meant that guard rooms could quickly fill with a thick, biting haze, leaving men blinking, coughing, their eyes watering even as their frozen hands began to thaw. Imagine settling down to sleep near the fire, comforted by its heat, only to wake with your throat raw and your lungs feeling heavy and clogged with smoke. It was the stark trade-off of survival, warmth at the cost of breath. Specialists remain divided about how effective these hearths truly were, especially in the higher towers. Some argue that flues were carefully and skillfully built into the masonry, venting the smoke efficiently. Others claim the systems were crude at best, leading to constantly smoky interiors that were almost unbearable. The truth may be that both versions existed side by side, their quality depending on the wealth of the castle and the skill of its masons. A royal garrison might enjoy relatively clean warmth, while the guards of a poor keep simply choked on their own fires. Picture the sensory detail of one such chamber. A small fireplace is carved into the wall, glowing a deep, vibrant red as the logs within it crackle and spit. Sparks leap upward, chasing flickering shadows across the vaulted ceiling. The air smells of sharp pine resin and dense wood smoke, mingled with the ever-present scent of damp stone. A guard stretches out his hands, sighing as the intense heat penetrates his numb fingers. Another sits further back, letting the warmth wash over his face, while the rest of his body still tingles with a stubborn cold. Cloaks hang near the fire to dry, dripping faintly onto the hearthstones, hissing when the drops touch the hot embers. You lie near the hearth yourself, your eyes half closed. The fire's glow flickers behind your lids, a warm orange dance that lulls you into a state of drowsy peace. Every snap of the logs becomes a kind of rhythm, as steady as a heartbeat. You can hear the gentle whoosh as a new draft pulls the smoke up the vent, followed by the faint, mournful whistle of the wind outside. The warmth is wonderfully uneven. Your face is hot, while your feet are still icy, but the contrast itself makes you sleepy. These hearths had their peculiarities. Some were positioned deliberately near arrow slits so that the smoke could find an easier exit. Others were tucked deep into corners, leaving much of the chamber entirely unheated. The guards learned where to sleep. The closer you were, the warmer you were, but also the smokier. Too far, and the cold would creep back in. It was a nightly negotiation, a silent dance of proximity to the flame. The fireplace was more than practical, though. It was profoundly symbolic. Fire represented civilization against chaos, order against the encroaching dark. In a castle tower, the hearth reminded the guards that they were not merely freezing animals, but men bound together in service, watching over their lord's domain. Around that glow, songs might be sung softly, prayers whispered, or dice thrown onto the flat hearthstones. The fireplace transformed the chill prison of stone into something that just faintly resembled a home. Still, not every guard could enjoy it. Many posts were too exposed for any kind of hearth. Soldiers on the open wall, walks or in gate towers returned only after their shifts were over, often to find the embers already dying. In those cases, the fire's glow became a fleeting luxury, something you caught only for a precious moment before collapsing into your straw and cloak. One curious detail comes from accounts of castles in particularly cold regions, where entire chimneys were stuffed with straw to keep drafts from reversing down the flue. The guards would then burn smaller, more controlled fires in the wall niches, carefully rationing their precious fuel. It shows just how desperate men were to keep warm in a world where the stone itself seemed determined to freeze them. As you close your eyes again, you feel the hearth's radiant heat on your cheeks. The fire pops, sending a single spark skittering across the floor. A comrade stomps it out quickly, muttering about how easily the rushes might catch, but the warmth remains steady, like a second heartbeat in the chamber. The smoke swirls, acrid and heavy, but you breathe it in anyway, letting it numb your senses. For tonight, the fireplace has kept death at bay. You tuck yourself tighter into your cloak, letting the stone wall press against your back, feeling the fire's deep glow seep into you. Sleep steals over you slowly, the warmth balancing just enough against the persistent cold. Beyond the walls, the wind still howls, but here in the small circle of firelight, you dream of summer fields, the crackle of the logs merging with the rustle of wheat. The fire in the wall niche fades once more, and the stone chamber grows colder with every breath you take. Your thoughts now wander toward another method men used to trap warmth, not through the ephemeral life of flames, but through the simple persistence of fabric. When you look around, you notice cloth hangings, patched and heavy, draped from the wooden beams and stretched taut across corners. These makeshift curtains are far more than decoration. They are essential barriers against the insidious drafts that slip in through every arrow slit, crack, and ill-fitting doorway. Medieval sources often describe how both nobles and soldiers would hang cloth around their sleeping areas. In a grand hall, these might be rich tapestries woven with scenes of silk or wool. In a common guardroom, however, they were more likely to be coarse, heavy blankets nailed securely at the corners. Yet the fundamental purpose was exactly the same: to create a precious pocket of warmer air inside the endless, pressing chill of the stone. One well-attested practice was the use of bed curtains. Even in the most humble settings, beds were sometimes enclosed with thick hangings that reached all the way to the floor. These trapped the combined heat of bodies and breath, creating a distinct microclimate within their enclosure. Imagine 4 soldiers sharing a corner bedstead, their cloaks pulled tight, the heavy bed curtains closed around them. Outside this little tent, frost might be coating the walls, but inside, the air grows noticeably warmer, though it becomes thick with the familiar smells of sweat and damp wool. The arrangement also offered a measure of privacy, but for the guards, warmth was always its primary, most cherished gift. There's something rather unusual that historical records hint at. Men would occasionally string their own cloaks or spare garments across ropes to mimic curtains when none were provided. A guard could hammer 2 nails into the wall, knot a rope between them, and drape whatever cloth he possessed over it. It wasn't elegant, but it effectively broke the draft. You can picture such ingenuity: boots drying near the hearth, cloaks stretched out overhead, and men curling beneath the makeshift canopy as if they were inside a small tent pitched within the tower itself. Debate still lingers among historians about how widespread these improvisations were in military settings. Some scholars argue that cloth hangings were expensive commodities, rarely wasted on common guards. Others point to archaeological finds of nail holes in tower walls as evidence suggesting that fabrics were indeed suspended, perhaps in much humbler versions for the soldiers. It may be that common guards used rough hemp or wool, while wealthier households enjoyed brightly woven scenes depicting saints or royal hunts. Close your eyes now, and imagine yourself inside such an enclosure. The curtain droops just overhead, faintly damp, and smelling of accumulated smoke and grease from months of use. But as you breathe beneath it, you immediately notice the difference. Your own exhaled warmth now lingers around you, no longer instantly stolen by the drafts. The air feels thicker, heavier, but also safer. Outside, you can hear the sharp hiss of the wind through the arrow slits. Inside, only the muffled sound reaches you, as soft and soothing as a lullaby. The sensory world here is intimate. Your hand brushes against the fabric, rough and coarse beneath your fingertips. The curtain sways gently as another guard shifts beside you, stirring the enclosed air. You listen to his breathing, steady and close, and feel a small comfort in the knowledge that both of you are hidden together from the vastness of the night. The curtain is no fortress, but it is a cocoon. Some castles went even further. Wealthier garrisons sometimes built wooden screens around sleeping alcoves, which the guards would then hang with cloth to create miniature private chambers. These cubicles gave each man, or pair of men, a welcome sense of enclosure. Picture a row of such spaces along a tower wall, each glowing faintly with candlelight, their curtains pulled shut like little lanterns glowing in the dark. The effect was almost home-like, though the draught still managed to slip beneath the screens, reminding the men that the stone could never be fully tamed. And there were practical concerns too. Cloth hangings inevitably collected soot and grease, becoming heavy with grime. They needed to be taken down and beaten out just like rugs or bedding. Left unattended, they stank, and could even grow mouldy in the damp towers. Yet the guards accepted this, because even a smelly, grimy curtain was better than the bare, weeping stone. An odd superstition clings to these hangings in some accounts. It was said that spirits of the cold, imagined as thin, sneaky demons, could not pass through wool. Whether born of faith or sheer desperation, guards sometimes muttered charms as they pulled the curtains shut, convinced that they had barred not only the wind, but the night's unseen evil as well. The psychological impact of this was real. When you lie beneath a canopy or behind a curtain, the sense of enclosure has a calming effect. The vast, echoing chamber shrinks into a small, private den. The shadows grow less menacing. The drafts become muffled sighs instead of stinging gales. You sleep more easily, convinced that you are protected, even if only by a thin sheet of cloth. So you settle into your straw, the curtain swaying faintly above you. You tug it lower, shutting out the relentless draft that rattles against the tower's arrow slit. The chamber darkens into a shared pocket of warmth with your comrades. Outside, the wind still prowls, like a hungry animal. But here, behind your makeshift wall of fabric, you finally slip into drowsiness. The stone still presses its cold into the room, but you, wrapped in wool and hidden beneath a curtain, have managed to outwit it, if only until the dawn. The curtain sways in the persistent draught, and your mind drifts to another remedy, one that warms you from the inside out. Guards in medieval castles, much like peasants in their villages or nobles in their great halls, held a deep and abiding belief in the power of drink to chase away the chill. Heavy tankards of ale, mugs of sweet mead, or on truly fortunate nights, mulled wine infused with precious spices became their inner hearth. Contemporary accounts remind us that fermented drink was often safer than the local water, and certainly more available than milk. But in the icy depths of a long guard's night, the most important quality was a simple one. Alcohol promised warmth. It is a widely recognized truth that beer and ale were absolute staples of the medieval diet. Even low-ranking sentries received daily rations, not as a luxury, but as a dire necessity. The liquid calories provided energy, while the mild alcohol served to dull the persistent aches and ease the sharp sting of the cold. You can picture a guard finishing his watch, gulping down a cup of thick, cloudy ale, then curling up on his straw pallet, feeling a welcome warmth bloom in his chest as if he had swallowed a small, contained fire. Something rather unexpected surfaces in a few scattered chronicles. Guards would sometimes heat their drinks. Hot ale or warmed mead, thickened with a dollop of honey, was believed to help men sleep soundly in the frigid chambers. Spices like cinnamon or cloves were expensive imports and thus rare, but when available, they transformed the simple drink into both a medicine and a decadent indulgence. Imagine cupping a steaming wooden mug, the sweet, spicy aroma rising into your nose while the frost creeps silently along the walls behind you. It is comfort in a liquid form, the closest thing to central heating a medieval soldier could ever hope for. Yet, a debate lingers in academic circles over how effective this practice truly was against the cold. Modern science tells us that alcohol causes blood to rush to the surface of the skin, giving a sensation of heat, but in doing so, it actually cools the body's core faster. Did medieval guards unwittingly worsen their risk of hypothermia? Or did the significant caloric load of the beer and mead, dense with malt and honey, manage to counteract the danger? The evidence remains mixed, leaving ample room for speculation. Picture the sensory experience. You raise the wooden cup to your lips, its rim rough and slightly splintered from use. The ale inside is thick, almost chewy, with a sharp yeasty tang. It is not crisp and clean like modern beer, but earthy, heavy, and faintly sour, almost a meal in itself. You gulp it down, wiping the froth from your beard, and already you can feel the pleasant illusion of warmth spreading through your chest. A comrade passes you a jug of mead, golden and sticky, its rich sweetness clinging to your tongue. The warmth deepens, your head grows pleasantly light, and the oppressive cold seems to retreat, if only in your imagination. The social effect of this ritual mattered just as much. Around the brazier, or near the hearth, guards shared drinks, lifting their cups in weary toasts. A single jug of ale would be circulated, and with it, laughter would rise and complaints would soften. For a few precious moments, comradeship replaced misery. The sound of mugs clinking together echoed faintly against the stone, a tiny rebellion against the crushing silence of the night. One curious anecdote appears in a 14th century garrison roll. A commander scolded his men for diluting their ale with hot stones to cheat the ration. They would drop heated rocks into their jugs, making the drink froth and expand as if to double its volume. The practice left the ale tasting scorched and unpleasant, but in the most desperate winters, the soldiers preferred bad beer to no beer at all. There was also a ritual quality to the drink. Guards sometimes swore oaths over shared cups, binding themselves to stay awake or to rouse one another if sleep crept in too deeply. The drink was not only fuel, but also a kind of glue, holding the men together in their cold vigil. Without it, the night stretched on endlessly, a black wall pressing in on all sides. With it, the darkness softened into something bearable, even humorous at times. Still, drink was always double-edged. Too much ale dulled the senses, and the records contain more than one tale of a drunken guard sleeping soundly through an alarm. The punishments were harsh, because one man's stupor could endanger an entire fortress. Yet, the practice endured, because commanders knew that denying alcohol outright would lead to mutiny or, worse, a crippling despair. Imagine the chamber now. A brazier glows faintly in the corner. The curtains sway against the draughts. The straw crackles beneath you, but in your hands rests a wooden mug half full of warm mead. The sweetness lingers on your tongue, and your cheeks glow with a false but welcome heat. For the first time tonight, you smile. The fire may fade, the curtain may flutter, but inside your chest, a small warmth remains. As your eyelids droop, you set the mug aside and curl deeper into your cloak. Your breath tastes faintly of honey. Your ears hum with the comforting memory of shared laughter, now fading into the sound of snores. The cold is still there, waiting, but it has been dulled for now. And in that hazy space between waking and sleeping, you finally understand why generations of guards swore that ale, mead, and wine were their best and most faithful allies against the endless chill of the castle nights. The curtain sways in the persistent draught, and your mind drifts to another remedy, one that warms you from the inside out. Guards in medieval castles, much like peasants in their villages or nobles in their great halls, held a deep and abiding belief in the power of drink to chase away the chill. Heavy tankards of ale, mugs of sweet mead, or on truly fortunate nights, mulled wine infused with precious spices became their inner hearth. Contemporary accounts remind us that fermented drink was often safer than the local water and certainly more available than milk. But in the icy depths of a long guard's night, the most important quality was a simple one: alcohol promised warmth. It is a widely recognized truth that beer and ale were absolute staples of the medieval diet. Even low-ranking sentries received daily rations, not as a luxury, but as a dire necessity. The liquid calories provided energy, while the mild alcohol served to dull the persistent aches and ease the sharp sting of the cold. You can picture a guard finishing his watch, gulping down a cup of thick, cloudy ale, then curling up on his straw pallet, feeling a welcome warmth bloom in his chest, as if he had swallowed a small, contained fire. Something rather unexpected surfaces in a few scattered chronicles. Guards would sometimes heat their drinks. Hot ale or warmed mead, thickened with a dollop of honey, was believed to help men sleep soundly in the frigid chambers. Spices like cinnamon or cloves were expensive imports and thus rare, but when available, they transformed the simple drink into both a medicine and a decadent indulgence. Imagine cupping a steaming wooden mug, the sweet, spicy aroma rising into your nose while the frost creeps silently along the walls behind you. It is comfort in a liquid form, the closest thing to central heating a medieval soldier could ever hope for. Yet, a debate lingers in academic circles over how effective this practice truly was against the cold. Modern science tells us that alcohol causes blood to rush to the surface of the skin, giving a sensation of heat, but in doing so, it actually cools the body's core faster. Did medieval guards unwittingly worsen their risk of hypothermia? Or did the significant caloric load of the beer and mead, dense with malt and honey, manage to counteract the danger? The evidence remains mixed, leaving ample room for speculation. Picture the sensory experience. You raise the wooden cup to your lips, its rim rough and slightly splintered from use. The ale inside is thick, almost chewy, with a sharp, yeasty tang. It is not crisp and clean like modern beer, but earthy, heavy, and faintly sour, almost a meal in itself. You gulp it down, wiping the froth from your beard, and already you can feel the pleasant illusion of warmth spreading through your chest. A comrade passes you a jug of mead, golden and sticky, its rich sweetness clinging to your tongue. The warmth deepens, your head grows pleasantly light, and the oppressive cold seems to retreat, if only in your imagination. The social effect of this ritual mattered just as much. Around the brazier or near the hearth, guards shared drinks, lifting their cups in weary toasts. A single jug of ale would be circulated, and with it, laughter would rise and complaints would soften. For a few precious moments, comradeship replaced misery. The sound of mugs clinking together echoed faintly against the stone, a tiny rebellion against the crushing silence of the night. One curious anecdote appears in a 14th century garrison roll. A commander scolded his men for diluting their ale with hot stones to cheat the ration. They would drop heated rocks into their jugs, making the drink froth and expand as if to double its volume. The practice left the ale tasting scorched and unpleasant, but in the most desperate winters, the soldiers preferred bad beer to no beer at all. There was also a ritual quality to the drink. Guards sometimes swore oaths over shared cups, binding themselves to stay awake or to rouse one another if sleep crept in too deeply. The drink was not only fuel but also a kind of glue, holding the men together in their cold vigil. Without it, the night stretched on endlessly, a black wall pressing in on all sides. With it, the darkness softened into something bearable, even humorous at times. Still, drink was always double-edged. Too much ale dulled the senses, and the records contain more than one tale of a drunken guard sleeping soundly through an alarm. The punishments were harsh, because one man's stupor could endanger an entire fortress. Yet, the practice endured, because commanders knew that denying alcohol outright would lead to mutiny, or, worse, a crippling despair. Imagine the chamber now. A brazier glows faintly in the corner. The curtains sway against the draughts. The straw crackles beneath you, but in your hands rests a wooden mug half full of warm mead. The sweetness lingers on your tongue, and your cheeks glow with a false but welcome heat. For the first time tonight, you smile. The fire may fade, the curtain may flutter, but inside your chest, a small warmth remains. As your eyelids droop, you set the mug aside and curl deeper into your cloak. Your breath tastes faintly of honey. Your ears hum with the comforting memory of shared laughter now fading into the sound of snores. The cold is still there, waiting, but it has been dulled for now. And in that hazy space between waking and sleeping, you finally understand why generations of guards swore that ale, mead, and wine were their best and most faithful allies against the endless chill of the castle nights. The sweetness of mead still lingers faintly on your tongue, but a deeper, more insistent sound joins it, the rumbling of your stomach, reminding you that true, lasting warmth doesn't only come from cloaks, fires, or drink. It also comes from within. It comes from food thick, heavy meals that fill the belly and stoke the body's internal furnace through the long, demanding night. In the medieval world, soldiers knew instinctively what modern science now confirms. Eat heartily, and your body fights the cold far more effectively. Chroniclers frequently note that guards were supplied with bread, cheese, salted meats, and sometimes a thick porridge rations designed specifically to provide energy rather than luxury. One well-documented detail is that guards on a winter watch often ate a substantial meal just before trying to sleep, a deliberate act to ward off the chill. A thick slice of dark rye bread, dense with coarse grains, paired with a solid lump of salty pork fat, might not sound inviting to you now, but to a weary sentry, those dense calories meant survival. The fat was pure fuel, burning slowly within, creating a steady, internal warmth that no cloak could ever provide. A soldier who went to bed hungry was a soldier who woke colder, weaker, and more likely to stumble on his next shift. Something oddly charming emerges from the scattered records. Guards sometimes saved scraps of food, not for their immediate hunger, but to tuck into their bedding as a midnight snack. Imagine rolling over in the drafty chamber, your fingers fishing inside your pouch for a piece of hard cheese, and chewing it slowly in the absolute dark while your comrades snore around you. The act was less about staving off hunger than it was about reassurance. A quiet reminder that the world still held some small comfort, even in the midst of the stone's bitter chill. It is the medieval equivalent of sneaking a cookie under the covers. Specialists still debate the exact makeup of a common guard's winter diet. Some argue that the rations were relentlessly monotonous, heavy on grains and salted fish, leaving little to no variety. Others point to accounts from wealthier castles that supplied beef, venison, or even imported almonds and figs during feast times, suggesting that guards occasionally tasted true luxury. The reality likely shifted with rank, wealth, and pressing circumstance. During sieges, even the finest garrisons saw their diets shrink to mouldy bread and a thin, watery gruel. But in better times, fatty meals before sleep were standard practice. Picture the sensory details of one such night. A heavy kettle hangs over the hearth, bubbling with a thick barley porridge, stirred with a long wooden spoon. The air smells of grain, earthy and warm, laced with the sharper tang of onions thrown in for flavour. A guard ladles a steaming portion into his bowl, sits cross-legged on the straw, and gulps it down, the intense heat radiating from his chest outward through his limbs. Another gnaws on a strip of salted beef, leathery but intensely rich, savouring the salt that clings to his lips. The sharp crackle of the hearth mixes with the satisfying crunch of crusty bread, and for a little while the chamber feels less like a prison of stone and more like a humble kitchen hearth. It is not only the calories that matter, but the ritual itself. Eating before sleep reassures you that you are cared for, that the supplies remain plentiful, that hunger will not join the cold as a nightly companion. Guards who shared food built bonds as strong as any forged in the heat of battle. A piece of cheese passed from hand to hand in the dim firelight carried a meaning that far outweighed its small size. Of course, these meals carried their own hazards. Too much fat just before lying down could cause a sour indigestion, leading to restless nights and dreams, thick with discomfort. The guards joked about having nightmares from bacon, though in truth their bodies simply struggled to process such heavy food consumed at odd hours. Yet even knowing this, few ever refused the comfort. Better to sleep queasy and warm than to shiver in an empty-bellied misery. There are small curiosities to be found, too. In some castles, guards ate chestnuts roasted directly in the embers, their shells popping and cracking as the heat split them open. The rich, sweet smell of roasting nuts must have filled the guardroom with an almost festive air, a brief moment of simple joy in an otherwise harsh routine. Elsewhere, onions were prized for their supposed power to strengthen the blood against the cold. A soldier crunching into a raw onion in the dead of night might have truly believed it was as protective as his cloak. A debate also lingers among historians about whether guards regularly received hot meals at night or had to rely on cold rations left over from the day. Some argue that the main kitchens closed down after supper, leaving the guards to gnaw on hardened bread. Others suggest that the small hearths in the towers allowed for simple cooking soups, porridges, and roasted scraps prepared by the soldiers themselves. The lack of detailed records means we can only imagine, guided by the faint traces of food remains found in archaeological digs. Now close your eyes and place yourself in that guard chamber after supper. The brazier still glows, the curtains sway gently against the draughts, and the warm, wholesome smell of barley porridge clings to the air. Your belly is full, pleasantly heavy, and a deep warmth radiates from within. You lie back on the straw, your cloak wrapped tightly around you, listening to the slow, even breaths of your comrades, who are equally sated. For a time, the cold feels distant, pushed back by the steady furnace of your own digestion. The sensory impression lingers as you drift towards sleep. The taste of salt still tingles on your lips. The smell of onion hovers in your beard, and the faint crackle of wood from the hearth punctuates the deep silence. You shift, content, pulling your cloak tighter and tucking your feet in close. Your body is heavy with food, your mind soft with fatigue. The stone may still press its unforgiving cold into the chamber, but your belly answers with its own quiet fire. You think of the simple rhythm of such nights. Eat, laugh, lie down, and trust that the warmth will last until the dawn. Perhaps you dream of grand feasts in noble halls, with endless platters of meat and flagons of spiced wine. Perhaps you only dream of another humble bowl of porridge. Either way, the memory of warmth follows you into slumber, proving that sometimes the simplest defense against the coldest stone is nothing more than a full stomach and a quiet moment shared among tired men. You drift into a warm, pleasant haze, but the sudden toll of the watch bell cuts through your drowsiness like a cold iron blade. You are reminded instantly that the night is divided not into one long, restorative stretch of rest, but into a series of rotations, short, punctuated intervals of forced wakefulness and uneasy sleep. This intricate system of shifts, so central to a guard's life, profoundly shaped how these men endured the relentless cold. Evidence from surviving castle regulations and military ordinances makes it unequivocally clear. Few guards were ever expected to stand in the freezing dark from dusk until dawn without some form of relief. Instead, the long watch duty was broken into manageable segments, with each man taking his turn while the others sought what little warmth and rest they could find. One firmly established detail from garrison rolls is that castles often divided the night into 3 or 4 distinct watches. In the depths of winter, those watches often grew shorter, not out of any particular kindness, but out of grim necessity. A soldier forced to stand perfectly still in the freezing air for more than a couple of hours risked the creeping stiffness in his joints, the treacherous numbness in his fingers, and the dangerous dulling of his senses. A sentry who froze became a liability, no better than a man already asleep. And so, the rotation itself was a weapon against the cold, a tacit acknowledgement that human endurance had its limits, even within the mighty walls of a fortress. And there's an unexpected curiosity in the records. Some castles used bells or horns to signal the changing of the watch, not only to wake the next group, but also to reassure the entire garrison that order was being kept. Imagine lying half asleep in your straw bed, hearing the faint, mournful bray of a horn from the battlements, and knowing with a surge of relief that another man has now taken your place. That sound is comfort itself, a solemn promise that for the next stretch of precious hours, you may close your eyes without guilt. A debate lingers among historians about how strictly these rotations were actually enforced. Some argue that discipline was exceptionally tight, with captains making regular inspections of the posts to catch any sleepers. Others suggest that, especially in smaller or more remote castles, The watch changes were looser, dictated more by common sense and a mutual, unspoken agreement among the soldiers. The truth probably varied with the circumstances. In times of siege or heightened threat, the watches grew stricter. In quieter periods, men likely negotiated their own rhythms of wakefulness and rest. Picture the scene inside the guard chamber. Two men rise reluctantly from the heap, tugging their cloaks over their shoulders and stamping their feet to chase away the lingering tendrils of sleep. Their comrades groan, curl tighter under their blankets, and relish the brief reprieve. The members of the fresh watch trudge toward the stairwell, their boots clanging softly against the stone, their breath already frosting in the cold air. Those left behind shuffle closer to the brazier, lay their heads on folded arms, and let the heavy weight of exhaustion claim them once more. The room sighs with the sound of shifting bodies, the dry rustle of straw, and the low, incoherent murmur of dreams. The sensory impression of these rotations is unique. You are never entirely asleep, and you are never entirely awake. The tolling of the bells, the scrape of boots on stone, the muttered voices, they all intrude constantly. Your rest is fractured, shallow, but it is just frequent enough to keep you alive. Each time you lie down, you know with certainty that it will not be for long. You curl tighter, breathing warm air against your cold hands, chasing warmth in these snatched, precious fragments of sleep. There is a deep camaraderie in the system too. Men who were relieved from their watch would often warm themselves quickly, then go to nudge their sleeping comrades awake to take their turn. Complaints were muttered, quiet curses were exchanged, but the cycle always held. Each man knew that his own relief would come in its turn. That fundamental fairness depended on the shared burden. Without such discipline, resentment would have festered. With it, a rhythm was formed, one that was harsh but utterly dependable. One odd anecdote survives from a Burgundian garrison. Guards were required to sing or whistle softly as they approached their sleeping comrades to rouse them. The sound was meant to prevent a sudden, violent panic in the dark, ensuring that the awoken man instantly recognized friend from foe. Imagine being stirred from a shallow sleep by a tuneless whistle, groaning awake and fumbling for your cloak while the others around you drift back into their slumber. It is a strange intimacy, this constant, necessary trade of wakefulness and sleep. The system carried its own dangers, of course. A man pulled too often from his sleep might stumble through his shift half awake, vulnerable to both the cold and his own carelessness. Others, left too long in their rest, might oversleep, missing their turn entirely. The punishments for this ranged from fines to lashings, but the deeper, more lasting punishment was the cold, simmering anger of one's own comrades, who were forced to endure longer in the biting wind because of another's laziness. Now, close your eyes and imagine yourself within that unending rhythm. You lie on your straw pallet, your cloak pulled up to your chin. The bell tolls softly, its sound echoing through the long stone corridors. Somewhere high above, a horn sounds. Two men rise, and you hear the sound of their boots fade into the stairwell. You shift in your bedding, sigh in deep relief, and let yourself sink deeper into warmth. But even in your sleep, your mind remains braced for the next toll, the next nudge from a comrade, the next moment when your turn will come again. This rhythm defines your night. It is not comfort. It is not true rest. But it is a vital compromise between vigilance and survival. You sleep in fragments, you dream in fragments, you live in fragments. And yet, somehow, those fragments add up to enough. Enough to keep you alive, enough to keep the castle safe, enough to carry you through another frozen night on the wall. The sound of the horn fades into the deep silence of the night, and your mind begins to wander, not toward the castle's defenses, but toward its architecture, toward the odd, hidden places where guards sometimes sought out extra, unconventional warmth. One of the cleverest methods, though rarely admitted aloud, was to sleep directly above the stables. The collective mass of horses, oxen, and even pigs generated heat in truly staggering amounts, and their combined body warmth would rise up through the floorboards, seeping into the chambers perched just above. Records from household accounts and castle surveys confirm this was not always an accident. Garrison rooms were sometimes deliberately positioned above or beside animal stalls, not only for the sake of convenience, but also for the subtle yet profound benefit of that living heat. It is a well-attested fact that medieval builders understood the practical usefulness of animal warmth. In monasteries too, novices sometimes slept in chambers directly over the biers, where the animals below gave off a steady, humid fug of heat through the cracks in the floorboards. The guards were no different. A sentry who trudged down from a freezing wall walk and into a chamber located above a stable would have felt, by stark comparison, as though he had just stepped into a warm bathhouse. It was still cold, yes, but it was no longer a deathly, bone-aching cold. The warmth of the beasts kept the frost from settling on the bedding, and their gentle sounds provided a strange sort of lullaby. Something rather peculiar emerges when you truly imagine it. The warm air rising from the stable carried with it a complex mingling of scents. The sweet perfume of hay, the sharp tang of dung, and the deep, earthy musk of the animals themselves. To you now, it may sound unpleasant, but to a weary, shivering guard, it was the smell of reassurance. That aroma meant warmth. It meant life, pulsing just beneath the floorboards. You could drift to sleep accompanied by the muffled snorts of the horses below, their hooves shifting softly in the straw, the rhythmic crunch of hay being chewed in the dark. It was less a chamber and more a living, breathing ecosystem, where man and beast shared both breath and heat against the common enemy of the cold. Scholars continue to disagree about how common this arrangement truly was. Some argue it was a deliberate and widespread design, noting that many castle keeps had their stables on the lower levels with guard rooms situated directly above. Others caution that not every fortress would have allowed such close proximity, especially in wealthier or more formal settings where such potent odours would have been frowned upon. The truth likely rests somewhere in the middle. Poorer castles leaned on animal heat as a necessity, while wealthier lords could afford the luxury of separate quarters for their men and their beasts. Imagine the full sensory scene. You lie on your straw mattress, but just beneath the floorboards, you can hear the horses shifting, the soft rustle of their tails swatting at flies even in the cold, and the occasional soft snort that breaks the deep silence. The air in your chamber is undeniably warmer than in the exposed tower above, carrying the faint sweetness of hay mixed with the acidic sharpness of manure. Your nose might wrinkle at first, but then it relaxes. The smell is simply part of the rhythm of life here. Your body loosens in the gentler air, and your breath no longer steams quite so fiercely in the dark. There was even an odd superstition tied to this closeness. Some guards believed that sleeping above animals granted protection against nightmares, that the beasts somehow absorbed evil spirits through their own powerful bodies. Others thought the opposite, that the animal spirits might creep upward, riding the warmth into the dreams of men. Whether you would have laughed or shuddered, the belief coloured how the men spoke of their quarters. A sudden snort in the middle of the night might be taken as a solemn warning from some invisible realm. But beyond any superstition, the practical warmth was undeniable. Guards would sometimes spread their bedding directly in the stable lofts, where great piles of hay served as both mattress and insulation. These lofts smelled strongly of dried grass, and the rising warmth from below kept the frost from ever forming. Sleeping there blurred the distinct line between a soldier and a common farmhand, yet survival blurred many lines in medieval life. The social side mattered too. Sleeping above the animals often meant a closer proximity among the guards, as these were typically small chambers crowded with men. Bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, listening to the life below, formed a strange and unique community, men and beasts together, all resisting the same cold. Laughter sometimes echoed in these rooms, filled with jokes about sharing fleas with the horses, or about being half a stable boy. But the laughter always hid a deep gratitude. Better the company of horses than the lonely company of frost. Now, picture yourself in such a chamber. You curl under your cloak, the gentle warmth rising from beneath. The straw under you feels softer, less brittle, warmed by the humid fug of the animals. Your ears catch the rhythmic, heavy breathing of the horses, a sound both steady and soothing. The faint crackle of their bedding straw below blends with the rustle of your own palate. The air is heavy, almost humid compared to the icy corridors, but you accept it gladly. You close your eyes, inhaling the scents of hay and musk. The warmth creeps deep into your bones, loosening the painful stiffness from your joints. Outside, the wind still lashes against the stone, rattling shutters and whistling through the arrow slits. But here, you are cocooned in a pocket of warmth created not by fire or by fabric, but by the steady, quiet life of the beasts below. The castle itself feels less hostile, more alive, as if its very stones breathe along with both horse and man. For tonight, you are grateful for the stables, grateful for the warmth, however pungent, and grateful for the snorts and stamps that remind you that the night is a shared burden. You drift slowly into sleep, lulled not by silence, but by the living heartbeat of the animals that keep your chamber just warm enough to hold death at bay. The remembered warmth of the stables fades as the bell tolls its summons once more, and you tug your cloak tighter, your thoughts turning to the small but essential defences every guard carried on his own body. While cloaks and furs served as the broad shields against the overwhelming cold, it was the socks, hoods, and mittens that were the daggers, small, but absolutely vital weapons in the endless, intimate battle with frost. Surviving inventories from castles mention these garments repeatedly. Woolen hose issued to soldiers, linen coifs tied securely beneath helmets, mittens crafted from tough leather or knitted wool. They may sound like trivial details, but in truth, they often made the difference between a night of fitful sleep and a night of abject, shivering misery. One established reality is that woolen socks, though simple, were among the most valued items in any guard's kit. Unlike modern woven socks, these were often stitched from sturdy pieces of cloth, or fashioned as long hose that reached far up the leg. Some extended all the way to the thigh, secured with garters, effectively wrapping the guard in a crucial sheath of warmth. Soldiers prized them so much that their repair was constant. Patches of cloth stitched carefully over holes, darning done with coarse, heavy thread, anything to prevent the icy bite of the stone floors from reaching bare skin. A guard who lost his hose in winter was a man half defeated before his watch had even begun. There's something unexpectedly charming in the historical records. Mittens were sometimes made with a single, large compartment for 4 fingers and a separate one for the thumb, much like the mittens you might remember from childhood. This design trapped warmth far more effectively than gloves, with their individually separated fingers. The men joked that the mittens made them clumsy, but they also allowed them to curl their hands into a fist inside for extra, self-generated heat. Some even slipped bits of rabbit fur inside for added insulation, creating a crude but remarkably effective lining. Imagine lying down after a long watch, mittens still on, your hands curled against your chest, the warmth clinging to them like a faint memory of the fire. Scholars remain divided about how common knitted items actually were during this period. Some argue that the craft of knitting spread widely by the late Middle Ages, making knitted socks and mittens available even to common soldiers. Others maintain that most such items were sewn from woven fabric, with knitting being too new and costly for mass military use. The truth is likely a patchwork, with wealthier castles issuing knitted garments, while poorer ones relied on simple, stitched cloth. Picture the sensory experience of these small comforts. You peel off your stiff, cold boots after a freezing watch and flex your toes inside your woolen socks. They are damp, but still clinging with a stubborn warmth. The wool scratches slightly, a faint trace of lanolin still lingering from the sheep, but you smile at the immense relief. You pull your hood lower over your face, a woolen coif lined with rough linen, and feel your own breath warm the fabric until it grows humid and soft against your skin. The mittens are stiff from constant use, but when you press them to your cheeks, they radiate the faint, grounding smell of smoke and leather, connecting you to the shared world of the guardroom. These garments fundamentally shaped how you slept. Men often wore their socks, hoods, and mittens to bed, knowing that removing them meant waking up with numb, useless extremities. A hood pulled down over the face acted as a personal mask, holding in the warmth of your breath. Mittens tucked under the arms kept fingers from stiffening into claws. Even socks, damp from a long patrol, were preferable to the shock of bare feet on cold straw. The layering was imperfect, but it was essential. One curious tidbit from German sources describes guards stuffing their socks with rabbit fur or dry moss for added warmth. It was an improvised form of insulation, softer than plain wool and surprisingly effective. Another account mentions soldiers wrapping cloth around their heads until they resembled mummies, muttering dark jokes about looking like corpses before they finally drifted off to sleep. Humor helped, even when the cold pressed its hardest. These small garments carried a symbolic weight, too. A hood was not merely a piece of cloth, it was a mark of identity. Knights wore richly lined hoods, trimmed with expensive fur, while common guards had plain, undyed wool. The difference clearly marked one's rank. But in the democratic darkness of the guardroom, everyone tugged their hoods low against the draft, leveling them all in their shared battle against the cold. Now imagine the chamber again. Men curl on their straw pallets, their cloaks pulled high. But what truly keeps them alive are these little things. Their toes are snug in their hose, their hands are cupped in their mittens, their faces are hidden deep within their hoods. The room is a sea of sleeping forms, with only noses poking out into the frigid air. From the doorway, they might look like anonymous bundles of cloth, indistinguishable from one another. But each bundle is a man, cocooned in the small, vital garments that mean the difference between life and frostbite. The sensory rhythm continues as you tuck your own mittens beneath your chin, feel your socks scratch against the straw, and draw your hood even tighter. The stone still radiates its immense chill, and the wind still whispers through the cracks, but the tenacious warmth of these small defenses lingers. You close your eyes, sigh into the fabric, and let the familiar scratch of wool and the faint, oily smell of lanolin become your lullaby. The remembered warmth of wool still clings faintly to your skin, but another, living comfort, now curls closer in the dark, padding softly across the rustling straw. You feel a sudden, warm brush of fur against your hand, hear the quiet huff of steady breath, and realize with a sense of peace that you are not alone. A dog, shaggy, faithful, and just as cold as you are, has settled in beside you. In the complex ecosystem of a medieval castle, animals were not only guards of the walls, but also vital companions in the guardroom. The watchdog was a vigilant sentinel by day, and by night it became a living, furry blanket, pressed against the ribs of tired men. It is a well-recorded reality that dogs were common fixtures in castles, highly valued for their sharp, unwavering senses. Chroniclers describe great mastiffs chained at the gates, swift hounds roaming the courtyards, and smaller breeds kept close for hunting or simple companionship. These animals were essential to the castle's defense, often alerting the guards to intruders long before any human ears could catch a sound. Yet those same animals, once off duty, became an integral part of the nightly struggle against the cold. A dog curled at your side was warmth and alarm, combined a guardian and a bedfellow all in one. There's something rather delightful in the surviving details. Some accounts note that dogs would often choose their favorite guards and would refuse to sleep anywhere else. Imagine a tired soldier returning from a long patrol, only to find his personal hound already sprawled across his meager pallet, its tail giving a soft thump against the straw, its eyes expectant. The man would grumble, shove the animal over, and make room. But the steady, profound warmth that followed would erase any trace of annoyance. It is a picture as deeply human as any a gruff warrior soothed by the simple, unwavering loyalty of his animal. Specialists remain divided about just how widespread this practice truly was. Some argue that in wealthy castles, the dogs were kept entirely separate, housed in dedicated kennels or with the huntsman. Others suggest that in more practical, less formal garrisons, dogs roamed freely, becoming a natural part of the nightly life of the guards. Archaeological digs lend weight to both sides of the argument. The bones of large hounds have been found in castle yards, but so too have claw scratches near the living quarters, hinting at their constant presence indoors. Picture the sensory moment. The dog presses its body against yours, radiating a steady, comforting heat. Its fur is coarse beneath your fingers. Its breath is warm on your wrist, carrying the faint, savory smell of meat scraps from supper. You shift, and it shifts too, pressing even closer, its tail thudding softly against the straw. Around the chamber, other dogs nestle against other men, a living patchwork of warmth scattered among the cold pallets. The room smells of fur and smoke, of leather and hay, an animal fug mingling with the scent of human sweat. The companionship mattered just as much as the heat. A guard who shared his bed with a dog slept more soundly, not only for the warmth but for the profound sense of safety. If footsteps echoed in the distant corridor, the animal would stir first, a low growl rumbling in its chest, its ears pricked. A man could bury his face deep in his cloak, knowing with certainty that his canine companion would not let him be surprised in his slumber. That reassurance was priceless in a world where danger so often came by stealth. One quirky tidbit survives in a ballad that describes a dog lying protectively across a knight's feet to guard both his warmth and his honor. It is a perfect blend of poetry and practicality. A man's feet were most vulnerable to frostbite, and a heavy, warm hound sprawled over them was as effective as any woolen sock. Imagine the immense relief of cold, numbed toes, slowly thawing beneath the living weight of a loyal beast. There was superstition too. Some men believed that dogs could sense spirits, their low growls warning of ghosts, just as surely as they warned of intruders. A guard who woke to his dog, barking at empty shadows, might mutter a quick prayer, convinced that the animal had just driven away something unholy. Whether born of truth or imagination, this belief added another profound layer of comfort. Your companion protected you from threats both seen and unseen. Of course, sharing your sleep with animals had its drawbacks. Fleas, ticks, and the occasional stench of wet fur were constant irritants. A guard might wake scratching furiously at bites or grumbling about the smell after his dog had rolled in something unpleasant. Yet, even with these inconveniences, most men accepted the trade. Better a few fleas than a frozen night utterly alone. Now, imagine yourself fully in that moment. You lie on your pallet, your cloak pulled high, the straw rustling beneath you. At your side, the dog breathes steadily, its chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm with yours. Its warmth seeps into you, slow and sure. Outside, the wind moans through the arrow slits, but inside, the dog shifts, sighs, and settles heavier against your ribs. You scratch behind its ear, feel the soft twitch of muscle, and smile in the dark. You close your eyes, lulled by the dual comfort of warmth and vigilance. The dog will hear the dangers you cannot. It will keep watch even as you sleep. And in return, you share your pallet, your cloak, your very breath. Together, you outwit the cold stone and the prowling night, proving that sometimes the simplest companions, four-legged and faithful, are the surest defense against the slow, creeping death of a frozen night in a medieval castle. The steady warmth of the dog curled at your side begins to recede as the night wears on, and your thoughts turn toward the great, turning wheel of the seasons themselves. Life inside a medieval castle was not a landscape frozen in perpetual winter. The rhythms of warmth and cold rose and fell with the passing of the year, and the guards had to adapt constantly, altering how they slept, what they wore, and even how they ate, all depending on the calendar. The stark contrast between their winter and summer routines shaped nearly every single detail of a guard's life, from the thickness of his bedding to the grueling length of the night watches. It is a well-established fact that in winter, sheer survival dominated every thought. Extra layers of wool, cloaks doubled up, heavy braziers hauled into the chambers, and bedding stuffed thick with insulating straw were all part of the grim arsenal essential just to stave off frostbite. Men slept in communal heaps, their dogs pressed at their sides, their food heavy with fat and salt to keep the furnace of the body burning brightly through the long, dark hours. The nights themselves were longer too, stretching out like black, frozen oceans, demanding more rotations of the watch and a sterner discipline to keep the men awake and moving. But when summer came, the entire pattern shifted, sometimes violently. Guards would shed their heavy layers, sleeping sometimes in nothing but a simple tunic or shirt. Cloaks were cast aside in dusty heaps. The braziers were entirely unnecessary, the hearths burned low, and curtains were drawn not to block cold draughts, but to mute the incessant, maddening buzzing of flies. Imagine lying in the very same guardroom where frost once formed on the walls, now feeling restless and agitated from the stifling heat that the stone has trapped and now radiates back at you. You kick at your straw bedding, which is now too warm even for comfort, and find yourself longing for the sharp, clean bite of the winter air. An unexpected detail emerges from the records. In the height of summer, guards would often drag their bedding outside onto the battlements or into the courtyards, choosing the cool night breezes over their stuffy, airless chambers. It was a desperate gamble for relief. Picture rows of soldiers stretched out along a high parapet, their cloaks spread beneath them, with only the silent stars overhead. The stone beneath them was still hard, but the open air offered a profound release. Of course, this practice carried its own risks: a sudden downpour of rain, a heavy dew, or the terrifying surprise of an enemy arrow, but many preferred it to the feeling of suffocating indoors. A lingering debate among scholars is whether summer or winter was ultimately harder for the guards. Some argue that the life-threatening peril of winter's bitter cold was by far the greater danger, draining a man's strength and directly threatening his life. Others point to the slow, grinding fatigue of summer, when the short nights meant fewer precious hours of rest, and teeming swarms of insects kept men tossing and turning on their pallets. Both extremes gnawed at a man's health in different ways, and neither season ever offered true, uncomplicated ease. Imagine the profound sensory difference. In winter, you wake to the sharp crunch of frost underfoot, your breath misting white in the air, your cloak feeling stiff with the frozen damp. In summer, you wake sticky with sweat, the straw beneath you clinging and damp from the thick humidity, the air heavy with the smell of too many bodies crammed too close together. You swat at the high, thin whine of a mosquito near your ear and roll away from the radiating heat of another man's shoulder, only to find no lasting comfort. The struggle simply changes its form, but it never, ever disappears. The rations shifted with the seasons as well. In winter, diets were heavy on salted meats, dense grains, and whatever could be stored for long periods. But in summer, fresh vegetables and fruits from the castle gardens would appear. These were lighter meals that did little to ward off a nighttime chill, but certainly eased digestion in the oppressive heat. A bowl of cold peas eaten before sleep felt a world away from a steaming pot of thick porridge shared in the depths of January. The rituals of bedding also changed. In winter, straw was piled thick to insulate against the cold stone, with furs and cloaks layered overhead. In summer, the bedding was thinned out deliberately, sometimes replaced entirely with woven mats of reeds or rushes that could breathe better in the heat. The guards complained about the insects that hid in these mats, but they were undeniably cooler than wool. You can imagine yourself stretching out on such a mat, the reeds crackling beneath you, the cool night breeze slipping gratefully across your face. There is even a curious tidbit from some sources that mentions guards sleeping with wet cloths over their heads in the summer, a primitive but clever form of evaporative cooling. The cloth would evaporate slowly in the night air, providing some relief, though it came with the risk of waking sick with a sudden chill. The very same men who cursed the freezing draughts in winter often prayed for them in the summer. Superstition colored the seasons too. Winter nights were thought to harbor more spirits, the long, deep, dark, inviting demons and ghosts. The guards would mutter prayers against frost and phantoms alike. In summer, the fear shifted toward disease. Miasmas, the bad air, thought to rise from warm marshes, were believed to creep into the bodies of men while they slept. Sleeping outdoors on the ramparts, though cooling, was whispered to be an open invitation for fevers. Close your eyes now and imagine the great cycle. The winter stone is icy, the cloaks are piled high, bodies are pressed close, and a fire crackles faintly in the corner. Then the summer stone is warm to the touch, cloaks are abandoned, men are sprawling in the open air, and flies buzz lazily in the long shafts of moonlight. The seasons roll one into the next, and the guards must adapt again and again, never truly comfortable, always chasing survival in a world where the weather itself was just another relentless adversary. Tonight, though, you feel the winter still. Your cloak is pulled tight, the dog is pressed against your side, the brazier's glow is fading. Yet you know with certainty that months from now, this very same chamber will be stifling, and you will yearn for the very cold that now feels so merciless. That ceaseless rhythm, harsh and unrelenting, is the very heartbeat of a guard's life in a medieval castle. The memory of the turning seasons still lingers in your thoughts, but now your mind drifts further, journeying outward beyond the cold stone of the castle walls, toward the lives of the peasants huddled together in their humble huts. Comparing their nights with the frozen vigils of the guards shows you just how different, and yet how profoundly similar, the struggle for survival could be. The contrast between the rural cottages and the noble fortresses is striking. One was humble but warm, the other was grand but achingly cold. Indeed, the guards often found themselves envying the peasants' smoky little homes, where the precious heat clung to the mud and wattle walls far more faithfully than it ever did to the grand, thick stone of the towers. It is a firmly observed truth that medieval peasants slept in close proximity to their hearths. Their houses were typically single-room structures with a central fire pit, its smoke escaping lazily through a simple hole in the roof. Unlike the castles, whose tall walls and vast echoing chambers seemed to trap the damp cold, these small cottages held their warmth far more efficiently, even if the air within grew smoky and acrid. Families would sleep together in great heaps of blankets, furs, and straw, with their animals often brought inside to add their own considerable warmth to the space. For all their poverty, peasants rarely had to endure the kind of bone-deep, penetrating chill that perpetually haunted the castle guard-rooms. Something rather curious emerges from the historical accounts. Peasants often used their own collective body heat much more deliberately than the guards did. They would pile the children in the very center of the bed, with the parents flanking them on either side, a living wall ensuring the smallest members of the family stayed the warmest. Sometimes a piglet or a goat kid was brought beneath the blanket as well, not for affection, but for pure, practical warmth. Imagine the soft snorts and rustles in the darkness, a living, breathing quilt of family and beast, a scene far more intimate than the stiff, regimented formality of castle life. Specialists remained divided on which existence was truly harsher, that of the peasant in his hut or the guard in his chamber. Some argue the peasants endured constant smoke inhalation, damp earthen floors, and a ceaseless battle with lice, making their lives no warmer or healthier in the long run. Others counter that the sheer, intimidating scale of the castles, with their soaring ceilings and endlessly draughty corridors, left the guards at a far greater risk of deadly frostbite. The debate continues, for both environments were unforgiving, though in their own very different ways. Picture the profound sensory difference. In a peasant's hut, you hear the constant, comforting crackle of a central fire, the occasional cough of family members, the soft shuffling of animals penned against the far wall. The air is thick, heavy with smoke, and the pungent smell of dung, but it is also undeniably warm, clinging to your skin like a woolen blanket. Now, back in the castle, you hear the lonely whistle of the wind through the arrow slits, the faint, sharp hiss of frost forming on stone, the restless stirrings of guards muttering in their troubled sleep. The air here is clearer, but it cuts right through you, stealing your warmth with every single breath. This stark comparison often weighed heavily on the minds of the guards. Some men who had been raised in villages would mutter that they preferred their own mothers' smoky cottages to the impossibly grand towers of their lords. Others would insist that serving in a castle was a distinct step up, fleas and frost included, because at least the food was steady and the shelter was secure from attack. Both views contain a measure of truth. Peasants endured the pangs of hunger more often, but the guards endured the bite of the cold more cruelly. There's an odd tidbit tucked into a 13th century account that perfectly illustrates this. When the garrisons were dismissed in the spring, some guards took their thick bedding home to their villages, praising its quality compared to the simple cottage straw. Yet the peasants just laughed at them, saying, "What is thick without a fire?" That simple, cutting question captures the very heart of the difference. Castles had the gear, but the peasants had the heat. There were symbolic contrasts, too. Straw in a hut was the family's bedding, replaced with each season, and often sweetened with fragrant herbs to freshen the air. Straw in a guardroom was communal, musty, and trodden flat by countless muddy boots. A peasant lying down might smell lavender and thyme scattered in the rushes. A guard smelled only sweat and damp wool. The materials were the same, but the atmospheres were worlds apart. Now, imagine yourself slipping from your castle guardroom and into a peasant's hut. You duck beneath the low lintel, your eyes immediately stinging from the thick smoke. The heat strikes you at once, a physical presence pressing in from the central fire. Children giggle from under a great heap of blankets, their cheeks rosy in the warm glow. A pig shifts in the straw near the door, grunting softly. You cough, you squint, and you think, this is not noble, not grand, but it is warm. Then picture yourself stepping back into the vastness of the castle. Soaring ceilings, great banners fluttering faintly in the constant draughts, and stone walls that are cold to the touch. You shiver, realizing that grandeur so often came at the price of simple comfort. This profound contrast shaped the psychology of the guards. Many of them longed for the raw simplicity of the peasant huts, where warmth was communal, close, and dependable. Yet others prided themselves on enduring the unique hardships of the castle, seeing it as proof of their toughness and their loyalty. Sleeping in the cold towers became a strange badge of honor, a mark that they were different from the villagers they once were. You settle back on your pallet, considering both worlds. The hut, smoky but warm; the castle, cleaner but cold. Each had its burdens, and each had its fleeting comforts. You tug your cloak tighter, wishing for the snug, chaotic warmth of a cottage fire, but you are resigned to the icy, lonely grandeur of the stone. And so, lulled by a deep and profound exhaustion, you drift into an uneasy slumber once again. Caught between the two distinct worlds of the medieval night, the thought of those smoky cottages finally fades, and your mind turns instead to another, more subtle influence on castle life: the pervasive routines shaped by the nearby monasteries. In the Middle Ages, castles and cloisters often stood side by side, their stone walls echoing one another, and the austere discipline of the monks inevitably left its mark on the garrisons as well. The guards and the monks lived in worlds starkly divided by walls and by duty, yet their nights were not so different as one might imagine. Both rose at odd, unnatural hours. Both were forced to endure the profound, unyielding cold of stone dormitories. Both relied on the rigid comfort of strict schedules to carry them through the long, oppressive dark. It is a firmly established observation that the great monastic houses set the very rhythm of the bells that echoed across medieval Europe. The canonical hours, matins at midnight, lauds at dawn, were marked by chimes that drifted beyond the cloister walls and into the castles nearby. The guards heard those bells and, even if unwillingly, found their own nights punctuated by that same solemn, holy rhythm. Just as the monks shuffled into their chill chapels to chant in the dark, the soldiers would shift on their straw pallets, half awake, reminded that their time never truly belonged to them, but to the inescapable order of the bell. Something rather curious appears in accounts of these mixed communities. Monks would sometimes act as moral overseers for the garrisons, encouraging or even demanding a greater discipline in the men's habits of sleeping and waking. In certain castles held by powerful bishops or abbots, the guards were expected to follow routines, not unlike the monastic ones, rising at set hours, sleeping in communal dormitories, and even keeping a strict silence after nightfall. Imagine a group of weary soldiers, itching to laugh or to curse, being suddenly hushed by the silent passage of a monk gliding through the guardroom like a shadow, his presence a quiet reminder that silence was holy, even in the midst of the bitter cold. Specialists remain divided about how strongly these monastic habits truly influenced the life of secular castles. Some argue the overlap was profound, pointing to powerful lords who deliberately borrowed monastic discipline to keep a tighter order among their men. Others insist that the soldiers lived by a much rougher, more pragmatic code, one less concerned with piety and far more with simple survival. The evidence is mixed, but the parallels are undeniable. Both monks and guards fought their own private battles with sleep, with hunger, and with the frost, guided by a shared, overarching culture of rigid routine. Picture the sensory world of a monastic dormitory. Dozens of men in simple wool habits lie side by side on plain pallets, with no fires permitted for fear of worldly indulgence. The air is sharp and clean, the men's breath visible in the deep dark. A profound silence is broken only by the occasional muffled cough and the soft rustle of cloth. The guards in the castle experience nearly the very same. Rows of men on straw, their cloaks pulled tight, forbidden fires that risk a harsh punishment. And a silence just as heavy, broken only by the mournful groan of the wind through the arrow slits. In both places, men prayed the monks with their psalms, the guards with their own muttered charms that the cold would not claim them before the dawn. There's even an odd tidbit about the monks that trickled down into guard culture. Some believed that sleeping without too many blankets actually toughened the spirit, a form of holy endurance. Certain commanders would echo this very idea, warning their men not to grow soft and decadent under too many furs. Imagine lying half frozen on your straw, grumbling to yourself that your own misery was somehow good for your soul. It was a curious, potent blend of faith and practicality, a way of turning raw hardship into a kind of virtue. The rhythm of waking at intervals was another powerful similarity. Just as the monks rose for their midnight prayers, the guards woke for their rotating shifts. In both cases, sleep was fractured, never whole, always broken by the call of duty. The result was the same: men stumbling through dark, cold halls, their eyes heavy, their minds dulled, their bodies aching from the unyielding chill. Both soldier and monk came to know the strange, disorienting twilight state of being half asleep, half in prayer, half on watch. The sensory details made these parallels vivid. The sharp sting of icy stone beneath bare feet, the musty, communal smell of old bedding, the muffled sound of snoring comrades, the faint, guttering glow of a single candle in the draught. Whether in a cloister or a castle, these shared details bound the men together in a silent, common endurance. Superstition tied them closer still. The monks warned of demons that prowled in the long night, whispering temptations into the ears of the drowsy. The guards muttered the very same warnings, though their demons often took the shape of creeping frost or silent enemy spies. Both feared what might slip past when their vigilance faltered. Both trusted that their strict routines, however harsh, were the only true bulwarks against disaster. Now, close your eyes and imagine lying in your castle guard room as the bells toll faintly from a monastery just beyond the walls. The sound drifts through the night, low and haunting, a solemn reminder that others, too, are awake, that others, too, shiver in great stone halls. You pull your cloak tighter, whisper a half-forgotten prayer you learned as a boy, and let the ancient rhythm carry you. In the deep dark, the line between the soldier and the monk begins to blur. Both live by discipline, both sleep uneasily, both chase warmth in worlds made of cold stone. For tonight, you are grateful for the rhythm itself. The tolling bells may wake you, the routines may grind you down, but they also give a vital shape to the endless night. Without them, you would simply drift, lost in the cold and the silence. With them, you endure, step by step, hour by hour, until the first pale light of dawn seeps through the arrow slits, and the long night finally, mercifully, loosens its grip. The echo of the monastery bells fades. Yet another sound soon creeps into the guard room, one that is less physical, more unsettling. As the wind moans through the arrow slits and the brazier dies to cold ash, the men begin to whisper stories. In the medieval mind, the cold was not merely weather. It was alive, a conscious force inhabited by spirits, by demons, or by the restless dead. You have heard your comrades mutter about frost demons that sneak through the cracks, or about the lonely souls of the drowned who drift on the winter winds. Superstition was a quilt just as real as straw or fur, one that covered the men with both a fragile comfort and a profound fear. A well-recorded belief across Europe was that the cold nights drew the spirits of the dead closer to the world of the living. Chronicles describe villagers staying indoors after dusk, muttering charms at their windows to keep out the malevolent night air. The guards, bound to their posts, had no such refuge. To them, every icy gust could carry more than a simple chill. It could be the very breath of something watching them from the dark. A guard curled under his cloak might whisper a prayer not against the cold, but against the frost, convinced it was something more than just weather gnawing at his bones. Something rather odd survives in the folklore of the time. Some soldiers swore that if frost formed on your eyelashes while you slept, it meant that a ghost had brushed its cold hand across your face. Others said that a man who woke with frozen hands had been physically grasped by the dead. Imagine waking in a stone tower, your fingers stiff, your breath fogging, and your comrades staring at you with wide, fearful eyes, muttering that a spirit had touched you in the night. Whether you laughed or shivered, the superstition sank deep into your soul. A debate lingers among scholars about how much weight to give these tales. Some argue that the men truly feared these spirits as a tangible part of their nightly life, while others believe such stories were half jokes, a way to lighten the sheer misery of the cold by giving it a personality. Perhaps both were true. Laughter by the brazier, followed by fervent prayers in the dark. The line between jest and faith blurred easily when the frost had numbed the senses. Picture the guard room now, steeped in such stories. The men huddle close, their cloaks drawn tight, telling one another of the strange, scraping sounds in the corridors, of the pale figures glimpsed on the battlements, of the dogs growling at shadows that no man could see. The brazier sputters, and the sparks flare as though in agreement with every whispered tale. A draught slithers through the arrow slit, and for a moment everyone stiffens, their eyes darting into the darkness. Then someone coughs, mutters a nervous joke, and the spell is broken. And yet, the unease always lingers. The sensory impressions are vivid. You lie under your cloak, your ears pricked to every creak of stone, every whistle of the wind. The air smells faintly metallic, as if it has been touched by ice. Your heart quickens when the dog at your side growls low in its throat, staring intently into the shadows. You know it is probably nothing, yet your fingers clench inside your mittens, and you mutter a charm you barely remember from your childhood. The night feels thicker now, heavier, as though invisible eyes are peering in through the walls. There was a curious ritual in some garrisons. Guards would spit into the brazier before sleeping, believing it drove away the spirits lurking in the corners. Others would cross their swords over the doorways, certain that no ghost could step past cold iron. A few even carried personal charms, bits of bone, carved wood, or knotted strings to tuck under their pillows. Archaeologists have found small talismans in the ruins of castles, suggesting that the faith placed in such protections was no idle talk. But superstition was not always so fearful. Some believed the cold winds carried blessings, that dreams born in the frost were truer than others. A man who dreamt vividly on a harsh winter night might rise in the morning convinced he had received a powerful vision. These more hopeful twists gave the men something to cling to, a way of turning the sheer cruelty of the cold into the mysterious hand of fate. Close your eyes now, and imagine yourself caught between this fear and comfort. The chamber is dim, the shadows are thick, and the fire is nearly out. A comrade whispers of ghosts seen on the battlements. Another laughs, but pulls his cloak a little tighter. The dog at your side shifts uneasily, its ears twitching at some sound just beyond your own hearing. You breathe slowly, convincing yourself it is only the wind, only the cold. Yet you whisper a prayer anyway, because the night feels impossibly long and the frost sometimes seems far too cruel to be mere weather. As you drift into an uneasy sleep, the stories coil and twist in your dreams. Figures walk through the stone corridors, their breath colder than the wind, their touch lingering on your skin. You stir, shiver, and clutch the dog closer, caught half awake, half dreaming. The superstition is alive all around you, a blanket woven of both fear and hope, reminding you that in a medieval castle, the cold was never just cold. It was something more, something imagined and real all at once. The lingering whisper of ghost stories clings to the air as you tug your cloak tighter. But not every explanation for the dangers of the cold came from the realm of superstition. Medieval minds also leaned heavily on the perceived wisdom of physicians, healers, and ancient medical texts to explain why some men froze while others managed to survive. The cold was not only a spiritual entity, it was humoral. Doctors of the age spoke in the language of balance of hot and cold, wet and dry, and they offered remedies that the guards sometimes followed faithfully and sometimes ignored with a weary shrug. One well-documented observation is that medieval medical theory insisted that cold air was actively harmful to the lungs and the brain. Ancient texts warned that inhaling the night air chilled the body's humours and invited a deep melancholy, or worse. To counteract this, physicians advised wrapping the head tightly at night and covering the chest with thick wool. The guards, hearing this advice filtered down from clerics or the few literate officers, would often pull their hoods close around their faces and sleep with their cloaks wrapped high about their chests. Whether or not they truly believed the science behind it, the practice itself was eminently practical. Something rather curious appears in the surviving household manuals of the time. Some recommended rubbing fat or oil directly onto the skin before sleep. Goose fat, lard, even potent fish oil was smeared on the feet and hands, believed to create a seal that locked in warmth. Imagine a guard carefully anointing his toes with thick, cold grease before pulling on his woolen socks. The smell would be pungent, but the effect was surprisingly insulating. You might wrinkle your nose at the thought, but in the context of icy stone floors, it was a price well worth paying. A debate among historians continues about how much of this formal medical advice actually trickled down into the life of a common guard. Some argue that only nobles or wealthy officers could access the written texts and the more expensive remedies like spiced wine or medicinal herbs. Others suggest that the simplified practices like eating warming foods or keeping one's extremities covered spread widely through a robust oral tradition. The reality, as is often the case, likely rested somewhere between these two extremes. Detailed prescriptions stayed with the elite, but the simple, everyday remedies filtered down to the men who shivered on the straw. Picture the sensory world of these remedies. One guard rubs oil into his hands, the slick sheen catching the faint firelight. Another sips a cup of hot wine steeped with cinnamon, its aroma rich, exotic, and foreign. A third chews on raw garlic cloves, muttering that the physicians praised it as a powerfully warming food. The chamber slowly fills with an odd mingling of scents: smoke, sweat, grease, spice, and the sharp aroma of pungent herbs. The air feels heavier, but the men swear that it keeps them safe from the night's cruel bite. This medical advice often overlapped with diet. Doctors urged men to eat hot foods, onions, mustard, pepper before bed, to stoke their inner fire. The guards complied whenever they could, tossing whatever spices they possessed into their simple stews. A guard room after such a meal would smell fiercely of onion and pepper, enough to sting the eyes. But the men would laugh through their watering eyes, convinced they would sleep warmer for it. There was also the matter of posture. Some healers claimed that men should not sleep flat on cold floors, but should remain propped slightly upright to prevent the chill from settling in their chests. Guards who were without beds would improvise by leaning against the walls, their cloaks wrapped tightly, their heads tilted onto their shoulders. The result was undoubtedly a poor quality of rest, but perhaps it led to less stiffness in the morning. Whether it truly helped or not, the belief spread widely enough to shape how the men lay in the dark. One truly odd tidbit comes from a 15th century physician's note. He advised soldiers to keep a live chicken under their bed, as its constant warmth was believed to actively draw the cold away from the body. Whether any guard actually followed such peculiar advice is uncertain, but you can almost picture it. A puzzled soldier curled on his straw, a chicken clucking softly beneath him, both of them enduring the long night together. The sensory impressions of this medical practice were layered onto the nightly routines. The oils on their skin made the bedding feel sticky. The spices burned in their throats and noses. Strong-smelling herbs hung in small pouches above their palates, believed to purify the dangerous air. A guard lying beneath such a charm might breathe the sharp, clean scent of sage or rosemary all night long, half comforted, half annoyed, but utterly convinced it offered him some form of protection. Even water was treated with deep suspicion. Physicians warned against drinking cold liquids at night, insisting they weakened the stomach's inner fire. Instead, the guards would sip warmed ale or a thin, hot broth. You can imagine a weary man holding a steaming cup, nodding in solemn agreement with a wisdom he barely understood, but trusted nonetheless. Close your eyes now and picture the chamber, layered with these varied remedies. Guards rubbing grease on their feet, others chewing on raw garlic, still others tying herbs into little bundles above their beds. The smells are overwhelming, the practices are odd, but the intention is always the same: to guard against the cold that their medicine described as a dangerous imbalance of the humours. In their own way, these rituals gave the men a precious sense of control. As you curl beneath your own cloak, you think of all the advice. Cover your head, eat onions, rub on fat, sip a warm drink. You chuckle softly, but you follow it anyway, because in the end, anything that promises even a flicker of warmth is worth trying. And as your eyelids drift closed, you feel the faint heat of the oil on your hands, the spice still tingling in your throat, and you surrender to the uneasy sleep that medieval medicine promised would be just a little safer, a little warmer than it would have been without it. The memory of these strange remedies clings to you: the smell of garlic, the slick feel of grease on your skin. But as you nestle deeper into the straw, another thought rises, unbidden. Not every guard endured the night equally. Social rank shaped a man's warmth just as surely as wool or fire. A noble's personal bodyguard might fall asleep in relative comfort, while a common sentry froze in the very same chamber, only a few feet away. The cold, like so many other things in the Middle Ages, was unevenly distributed. It is firmly established in household accounts that lords often provided far better bedding and clothing to their personal retainers. These royal or noble guards sometimes slept on raised wooden frames, on mattresses stuffed with soft down or feathers, and under blankets lined with real fur. Their cloaks were trimmed with fox or sable. Their hose were better woven, their boots far sturdier. Such luxuries didn't make them immune to the cold, but they certainly softened its sharpest bite. Meanwhile, the ordinary watchman had to make do with flattened straw sacks and cloaks that were already patched and threadbare from long, hard use. Something rather unexpected surfaces in a few chronicles. Nobles would occasionally gift their guards their old, cast-off garments, not out of pity, but out of pure practicality. A cloak that had grown too shabby for a lord could still save the life of one of his soldiers. Imagine a retainer wrapping himself in a velvet cloak, once bright but now faded and worn, its deep warmth unchanged despite its frayed hem. The soldier would boast about the garment, not because it was pretty, but because it was warmer than anything he had ever owned before. Specialists remain divided about how wide this gap in comfort truly was. Some historians argue that the elite guards enjoyed dramatically better conditions, nearly as fine as those of their masters, especially within the opulent royal courts. Others caution that even these noble retainers had to endure the freezing towers and draughty guardrooms, their luxuries only serving to make them slightly better off than the common soldiers. The truth likely varied. A king's chamber guard in Paris might have rested far more comfortably than a local lord's sentry in a remote border castle. Picture the profound sensory difference. At one end of the chamber, a noble's guard pulls a heavy fur over himself, the pelt thick and soft, smelling faintly of a rich musk. He stretches out on a raised bed, the mattress yielding gently beneath him. His cloak is lined, his boots are sturdy, his hood is snug. Across the very same room, a common watchman lies on the bare straw, his cloak thin and threadbare, his socks patched with mismatched scraps. His toes curl, aching with a deep, persistent cold, while the noble's guard sighs into a state of relative warmth. The contrast is not hidden. It is present in every glance across the chamber, in every rustle of finer cloth. And yet, even with this great disparity, the bonds of service created peculiar, shared moments. A noble might order his personal guard to share his warmer quarters, while the rest of the garrison huddled together elsewhere. But in true emergencies, sieges, raids, the bitterest of winters, the lines would blur. In these moments, even the king's men might find themselves shoulder to shoulder with the ordinary soldiers, sharing whatever warmth they could collectively create. When desperation rose high enough, the cold could be a great leveler. One curious tidbit comes from a 14th century account in England. A royal guard complained not of freezing, but of sweating, his bed so piled with luxurious furs that he awoke completely drenched. His comrades, half frozen nearby, could only mutter quiet curses. It was a stark reminder that too much comfort could feel almost unnatural in a place built of cold stone and hard steel. The disparity carried a heavy symbolic weight. To sleep warmly was to embody privilege, to display power even in a state of rest. To shiver was to remember your station. The guards internalized this hierarchy. Some accepted it as the natural order of things. Others grumbled quietly in the dark. But whether cushioned in soft feathers or curled on sharp straw, all of them still listened to the same wind howling through the arrow slits. All of them still feared the frost gnawing at their extremities. Now close your eyes and imagine yourself as both men. First, as the favored guard, wrapped in fur, your straw mattress lifted just above the chill of the floor, dreaming easily while the fire glows nearby. Then, as the common sentry, pulling a thin cloak tight around you, the straw poking through the worn fabric, your dreams fractured by the chattering of your own teeth. Both of you lie in the same room, yet your nights are worlds apart. Still, the dawn that comes will treat you both alike. The horn will sound, the watch will change, and the cold will press in again. Privilege softens the night, but it can never banish it entirely. In a medieval castle, Even the best-placed guard still woke with his breath steaming in the air. A final, humbling reminder that the great stones cared nothing for rank. And so you, wrapped in whatever cloth you own, drift once more into an uneasy sleep, grateful for any scrap of warmth, resentful of none, for survival itself is the only true privilege the cold will ever grant. The stark contrast between the rich and poor guards lingers in your thoughts, but soon your mind drifts away from them, out to those who were not permanent members of the garrison at all, the travellers, the merchants, the royal messengers, and the wandering pilgrims who sometimes found themselves seeking shelter inside the castle walls after nightfall. Unlike the seasoned sentries, who knew every trick and stratagem against the frost, these temporary guests had to improvise their survival, often under the watchful, knowing eyes of the very men who were trying to keep warm themselves. It is a well-documented fact that castles often acted as vital way stations. Royal messengers carrying urgent letters, merchants transporting their valuable goods, or noble allies travelling on the road might be offered a night's shelter as a matter of course. They were rarely, if ever, placed in the noble chambers, unless their rank absolutely demanded it. More often they found themselves lodged in outbuildings, communal guest halls, or even in the same draughty, cold guard rooms as the common garrison. The sleeping arrangements always depended on available space and the immediate circumstance, and a warm night was never guaranteed. Something rather curious emerges from the surviving travellers' accounts of the period. Many of them learned to bring their own bedding. A merchant might unroll a thick wool blanket he carried in his pack, or a pilgrim might spread out a simple cloak, stiff with the accumulated dust of the road. They learned quickly, and sometimes harshly, not to rely on the hospitality of the castle for their comfort. Imagine a weary rider arriving near midnight, being gestured to a corner where he shakes out some straw for himself and wraps himself in his own cloak, all while the guards nearby smirk knowingly amongst themselves. He would soon learn the true, uncompromising chill of those great stone walls. Scholars remain divided about how generous castles truly were with their unexpected guests. Some argue that hospitality was considered a sacred duty, and that even the lowliest travellers would receive a portion of straw, a spare blanket, and access to the communal fires. Others maintain that the garrisons guarded their precious supplies jealously, offering little more than a patch of cold floor space and perhaps a grudging nod. The archaeological finds of portable bedding, rolled mats, travelling blankets, even small folding frames, suggest that prudent travellers often prepared for the worst. Picture the sensory world of such an improvisation. A traveller spreads his cloak in a dusty corner, brushing aside the musty, flattened straw left behind by countless others. He pulls a leather bag under his head to serve as a pillow, the material creaking softly in the quiet. The guards shift on their own pallets, some eyeing him with a detached curiosity, others ignoring him entirely. The air in the room smells of smoke, damp wool, and the unfamiliar scent of new bodies. He shivers, an involuntary tremor running through him, entirely unused to the unrelenting chill of the castle stone, and curls tighter beneath his thin covering. Some resourceful guests actively sought warmth by drawing close to the guards' fires. There are tales of messengers slipping a few coins to the soldiers in exchange for a coveted place near the brazier. The brazier glows a deep red, a small island of comfort in the dark. The guards might mutter about fairness, but the coin jingles softly in someone's purse, and the traveller sleeps a little easier. In the morning, the heavy smell of smoke will cling to his cloak, but he will rise far less stiff than he would have otherwise. A curious anecdote from a German castle notes that travellers were sometimes told to sleep in the stables, not only to free up space in the main keep, but because the collective warmth of the animals was considered superior to the cold stone chambers themselves. A pilgrim might curl up in the clean hay beside a great warhorse, waking in the morning to the surprise of a wet nose against his cheek, but feeling warmer than he would have been in the guard-room. Though it may have been humiliating to some, many accepted the practical arrangement gratefully. This hospitality, however, carried its own risks. The guards would grumble about the strangers bringing in fleas or stealing their blankets. Some castles imposed strict rules. Travellers were to surrender all their weapons before bedding down, and the guards were explicitly ordered to watch them closely. For the weary guest, sleep would come uneasily. Warmth was traded for a profound sense of vulnerability, lying down under the constant, suspicious eyes of men who could easily turn hostile. Close your eyes now and imagine yourself as one of these travelers. You have ridden all day through a cold, persistent rain. Your cloak is damp and your very bones are aching. You enter the guard room with a sense of immense relief, only to find that the air inside is somehow even colder than the stable you just left behind. The guards wave you wordlessly toward a corner where you spread some straw hastily and wrap yourself in your damp cloak. You can hear their muffled laughter, their muttered stories, their deep snores as they finally drift off. You, however, lie awake much longer, your teeth chattering, wondering if the morning will ever come. For the seasoned guard beside you, this night is merely routine. But for you, the traveller, it is a harsh lesson in humility, a stark reminder that castles, though immensely strong, were never built for comfort. Yet in the end, both of you share the very same goal, to last until the dawn without freezing. And as your eyes close at last, shivering under a thin layer of cloth, you realize that you are now part of the same ancient story of survival, bound together by the unyielding realities of stone, straw, and cold. The image of the shivering travelers fades, and your thoughts now shift toward the families who sometimes lived within the formidable castle walls. Not every guard was a solitary, lonely figure. Many brought their wives and children with them, especially in the long-term garrisons where their service might stretch on for years. These women and children shared the very same drafty chambers, the same icy stone, and the very same hard-won tricks of survival. At night, a castle was not only a fortress, it was also a strange, half-hidden home. It is a well-attested fact that in times of peace, garrisons often included entire households. Records of provisioning list not only bread and ale for the soldiers, but also extra grain, cloth, and firewood for their dependents. The wives often acted as laundresses, cooks, or nurses. The children would fetch water, run errands, or tend to the smaller animals. And at night, all of them would face the same biting cold as the men on watch, curling together in the corners of towers or tucked into small lofts above the storerooms. Something rather touching emerges from these accounts. Children often slept directly beside their fathers in the guard chambers, burrowed deep under the same heavy cloaks. Imagine a weary sentry returning from his shift, his boots still wet, lying down on the straw with his small son pressed tightly against him, both of them wrapped in a single woolen blanket. The boy, already asleep, breathes evenly and deeply. The father, bone-tired and cold, smiles faintly in the dark. That simple, profound closeness turned the bleakest rooms into places of fragile, human warmth. Specialists remain divided about just how common these family arrangements truly were. Some argue that many castles were strictly military installations, barring women and children entirely, except perhaps in times of a desperate siege. Others point to detailed payroll records and household lists that clearly included families, suggesting they were far from rare. The truth may lie in the specific size and purpose of the castle. Frontier fortresses were often Spartan and forbidding, but the great administrative castles in more settled regions could become miniature towns, with families and all. Picture the rich sensory details of such a guardroom family. A mother sits near a brazier, mending socks by the dim, flickering firelight, the faint smell of singed wool drifting in the air. Children tumble onto the straw piles, their giggling quickly hushed by a stern look from their mother. A guard, utterly exhausted, dozes in a corner, while his wife gently pulls a cloak over him. The room is thick with sounds, the soft crackle of the fire, the muffled laughter of children, the incessant hiss of the wind through the arrow slits. The smell is layered and complex: smoke, sweat, the faint scent of milk from a goat tethered nearby, and the earthy tang of the straw bedding. One odd tidbit from a French castle roll mentions that children were sometimes issued half rations of ale, watered down and weak, to help them sleep in the cold. Imagine a drowsy child sipping the thin, warm ale before curling up against her mother's side, a false warmth rising in her cheeks, her eyelids drooping as the wind howls beyond the stone walls. It is a detail both strange and tender, a reminder that even the smallest among them shared in the particular customs of the garrison. For the women, the battle with the cold was no less fierce. Many of them worked while bundled in countless layers, their long skirts dragging through the damp rushes on the floor. At night, they would layer their own cloaks over their sleeping children, sometimes even cutting strips from their own precious garments to patch the family's bedding. Some would whisper charms against frostbite. Others relied on a deep and abiding faith, all while trying to create small pockets of warmth where none naturally existed. The presence of families also changed the psychology of the guards themselves. A soldier lying down beside his wife and children felt a different, deeper kind of responsibility, not just to keep himself alive, but to keep them alive as well. He could endure the misery alone, but watching his own child shiver made the cold feel infinitely more cruel. It also had the effect of making the camaraderie stronger. Guards who had families would often share extra fuel or food with those who did not, knowing that the burden was greater. Superstition surrounded the children especially. Some guards believed that the young ones attracted spirits of cold or sickness more easily, and so they would place protective charms under the children's bedding. Small bits of iron, sprigs of rosemary, or even tiny carved wooden crosses. Whether these objects were effective or not, they gave the parents a measure of comfort in a world where medicine was scarce and life was fragile. Now close your eyes and picture such a night. You are not alone in the guard room, but surrounded by the quiet, rhythmic chorus of a family's breathing. A child stirs in its sleep, murmuring softly. A woman tucks a blanket tighter around her sleeping husband. The fire burns low, but its gentle glow reflects in weary, watchful eyes. The chamber is still cold, the drafts still slip in, yet the simple presence of family reshapes it. The stone no longer feels like a prison but a fragile, precious shelter, where warmth is measured not only in degrees but in the profound solace of closeness. You drift into sleep among them, your own mind softened by the sound of a child's soft sigh, by the shared warmth of bodies huddled together, by the quiet, fierce determination of families who, against all odds, made even a castle's icy towers feel, for a little while, like a home. The gentle sighs of sleeping children fade into a distant memory, and now your thoughts turn toward those harrowing nights when all comfort was stripped away entirely when the castle was under siege. In such desperate times, warmth became even rarer, food scarcer, and sleep infinitely more fragile. A guard on duty during a blockade faced not only the familiar enemies of cold stone and biting wind, but also a gnawing hunger, frayed nerves, and the ever-present, gut-wrenching fear of an imminent enemy assault. To lie down and rest was to enter a world of profound deprivation, where survival meant enduring far more than just the frost. It is a well-recorded and grim fact that sieges could last for weeks, months, or even years. The chronicles tell of castles where the supplies dwindled so low that the men were forced to burn furniture for fuel and eat rats just to stave off starvation. In such conditions, warmth was nearly impossible to maintain. Fires were rationed with miserly care, the smoke kept as low as possible so as not to reveal their positions to the enemy. Guards would often find themselves trying to sleep without the comfort of a brazier, their breath hanging white in the air, the straw beneath them thin and damp from endless reuse. The cold pressed in heavier when their bellies were empty, for hunger stripped the body of its inner fire just as surely as the wind stripped the warmth from the skin. Something rather unexpected appears in the siege accounts. Men would sometimes choose to sleep in their armor. It was not only a state of readiness for a sudden attack that demanded it, but also the peculiar comfort of the steel itself. Though heavy, cold, and stiff, a suit of armor, when worn with its thick padding, trapped body heat surprisingly well. Imagine a soldier collapsing onto the straw after a long, exhausting watch, his helm set aside, but his mail shirt and padded gambeson still clinging to his body. The immense weight would press down on him, but the precious heat would be held in a desperate, uncomfortable compromise between safety and sleep. Scholars remain divided about whether wearing armor to bed was a practical choice. Some argue that sheer exhaustion made the men careless, that they would wear their mail into their slumber despite the stiffness and discomfort it caused. Others suggest that commanders would have discouraged it, fearing the rust that would form from sweat and the shortened life of the expensive equipment. Yet, the accounts of sieges mention more than once that men were found asleep, fully dressed, as though they were unwilling to risk either the cold or a sudden surprise. Picture the sensory scene of a besieged guard room. The fire is out, its memory a black stain of smoke against the ceiling. The air smells of sweat, of fear, of hunger, and of damp, rotting straw. A guard lies shivering, his belly aching and empty, his cloak thin and worn. Nearby, another gnaws on a hard crust of stale bread, the sound sharp and loud in the tense silence. Outside, the faint, rhythmic thud of enemy picks echoes through the stone as sappers attempt to dig beneath the walls. Every distant sound sharpens the cold. Every hunger pang makes the chill feel deeper. You tug your cloak tighter, but it cannot fill the hollow in your stomach. The psychological weight of it all was crushing. In times of siege, men no longer trusted that warmth would last. The straw rotted from the constant damp. The blankets grew riddled with vermin, and the rations shrank to almost nothing. Some guards would mutter that the cold itself was another enemy, one that was working alongside hunger to break their resolve. A soldier could fight other men, but he could not swing a sword at the frost or the gnawing emptiness in his gut. Curious and desperate practices arose in these times. Some garrisons rationed not only their food but their sleep itself, forcing the men to take shorter, harsher rotations so that more eyes could stay awake against a potential attack. Others would crowd the men into even tighter spaces, hoping that their collective body heat would stretch further now that the firewood had run out. Archaeological evidence of soot marks in unusual places, like narrow passages or even latrines, suggest that small, secret fires were lit, just large enough to warm a handful of guards without drawing the enemy's eyes. One particularly chilling tidbit comes from a siege in northern France. The guards, too cold and too hungry to think clearly, tore down the heavy wooden doors from the storerooms and burned them for warmth, despite knowing full well that this act weakened their own defences. Imagine the sharp crackle of an ancient door in the flames, the momentary blessed relief of the heat, and the lingering cold dread of having destroyed something so vital just to live another night. The sensory impressions grew sharper and more intense under siege conditions. The cold itself smelled sharper, almost metallic, mixed with the acrid smoke from the hidden fires. Hunger made every draught feel crueler, every gust like a physical slap across the face. The straw bedding grew damp and cold from the condensation of so many bodies, and the men would lie closer together, their stomachs growling as loudly as their snores. The chamber no longer smelled of hearty porridge or warm ale, but of sweat and a quiet, creeping despair. Yet even here, in this bleakest of settings, the men clung to their routines. They would whisper stories to one another before sleep, and sing soft, mournful songs to distract from the gnawing of hunger. Some prayed more fervently than ever before, believing that a divine warmth would shield them. Others fell into a grim, stoic silence, their bodies curled as tightly as if they were trying to vanish into their own cloaks. Sleep, when it finally came, was thin and restless, constantly broken by hunger pangs and the sudden, jarring alarms of the watch. Now close your eyes and picture yourself in such a night. You are not merely cold, you are hollow with a deep, aching hunger. Your cloak hangs loose on your shoulders. Your boots feel too big for feet that have grown gaunt and thin. The straw beneath you is damp, the air unrelenting. You curl tightly, your arms wrapped across your stomach, whispering a desperate prayer that the morning will bring some relief, though you know in your heart that the siege may stretch on for weeks. The cold, the hunger, and the fear all fuse together into a single, monstrous enemy. You surrender to exhaustion anyway, because sleep is the only true escape that is left. For a few hours at least, you can drift into dreams where the food is plentiful, the fires roar, and the warmth embraces you like a long-lost summer Sunday, until the horn calls again, until duty drags you back to the grim realities of frost and famine. You allow yourself that fragile reprieve. The bleak memories of siege and hunger finally drift from your thoughts, and you return to the quieter nights, when the castle was not under attack, but when order and discipline still shaped how the men slept. The guards were not free to choose their own hours or their comforts entirely. They lived by a strict set of rules, some written down in formal ordinances, others simply enforced by custom. Even in their most private moments of rest, the rhythm of authority pressed down on them like another heavy blanket, sometimes stifling, sometimes protective. It is well attested that many castles operated under a strict set of garrison regulations, whether written or unwritten. A captain of the guard would assign the watches, inspect the fires, and ensure that the bedding was laid out exactly where it belonged. The men were often forbidden to move the braziers at will, lest a stray spark set the dry straw alight. Some ordinances even specified precisely when the cloaks could be issued from the storerooms, and how many layers a single man was permitted to keep for himself. Sleep, just like wakefulness, was subject to command. Something rather curious emerges from a handful of the surviving rulebooks: the harshness of the punishments for sleeping out of turn. A sentry who abandoned his watch and was found curled up in the guard room risked a flogging, a branding, or worse. Even in the communal sleep of the chamber, a certain suspicion lurked. The guards were expected to wake at the first toll of the bells, to rise when ordered, and to surrender their warmth the very moment that duty called. Imagine drifting into a deep slumber, only to be shaken violently awake by the hard toe of a captain's boot, the threat of the lash waiting if you dared to groan too loudly. Specialists still disagree about how strictly these rules were actually followed. Some argue that in the major royal castles the inspections were frequent and harsh, the discipline rigid and unforgiving. Others suggest that in the smaller or more remote garrisons the rules softened in practice, that the captains would turn a blind eye as long as the men did not actively endanger the walls. It is likely that both are true. The letter of the law always loomed, but its enforcement probably bent with the immediate circumstance. Picture the sensory world of a highly disciplined guard room. The fire burns low but steady, carefully tended because the regulations forbid it to blaze too high. The men lie in neat rows, each in his assigned spot, their cloaks pulled uniformly over them. The air smells of smoke and weapon oil, faintly acrid from the armor laid nearby. The captain's heavy steps echo as he checks the room, the soft clink of his sword a constant warning not to feign sleep too deeply. Even in their rest, the men remain acutely aware of the hierarchy. They are sleeping, yes, but they are sleeping under watch. There's a tidbit of dark humour to be found in some of the accounts. Men who were caught dozing on duty were sometimes forced to perform humiliating penances. One chronicle describes a group of guards who were made to carry buckets of cold water through the courtyard barefoot as a punishment for nodding off. The irony was cruel. They were even colder afterward than they had been before, but the lesson undoubtedly lingered. Others were fined a portion of their ale rations, a loss that cut deep, for warmth was not only found in wool and fire, but also in drink. This discipline extended to the bedding itself. Some castles would issue fresh communal straw at set intervals, while others demanded that the men gather and replace it themselves. The straw was measured, rationed, even inspected. The guards would joke about being treated like livestock, their bedding allotted with the same cold precision as the fodder for the horses. Yet they complied, knowing that neglect would mean something far worse: vermin infestations, a pervasive dampness, or outright sickness. The psychology of this discipline mattered. The rules, though often resented, created a sense of predictability. A guard might grumble about being woken for his shift, but he trusted implicitly that someone else would rise when his own turn had ended. A captain's insistence on neat rows of bedding and orderly, controlled fires gave a sense of control against the overwhelming chaos of the cold. Order, in its own way, was another layer of insulation, thin but meaningful. Superstition was even woven into this system. Some captains insisted that their men cross themselves before sleep or recite a short, formal prayer. Others banned dice games in the guardroom, claiming they invited evil spirits. Whether these rituals were rooted in genuine faith or simply in a desire for discipline, they gave the men a sense of being protected, not just by the castle walls, but by the rules themselves. Now, close your eyes and imagine yourself in such a night. You lie in your assigned place, the straw rustling beneath you, your cloak drawn tight. The brazier's glow is small but steady, its heat rationed carefully. You hear the captain's boots fade as he leaves the chamber, the heavy door closing with a solid thud. Around you, your comrades shift and sigh, but none of them dare to complain too loudly. The rules hold the night together. You breathe slowly, surrendering to sleep, grateful for the order, even as you resent its iron grip. In the end, the discipline did not banish the cold, but it gave a definite shape to their survival. Without it, the guardroom might have dissolved into chaos, with fires burning too high, men sleeping too long, and watch posts left dangerously empty. With it, their life was harsher, but it was also steadier, and the castle was safer for it. And so, as you drift off beneath the weight of the rules as much as the weight of your cloaks, you come to accept that in a medieval castle, even sleep was an act of obedience, another duty carried out beneath the watchful, unforgiving eyes of the stone. The image of the captains pacing through the guardroom finally fades, and your thoughts wander toward the great structure itself, the very architecture that shaped every single draught, every breath of warmth, every shiver in the night. Castles were built for defense first and for comfort a distant second, and their very design made the battle against the cold an everyday, unwinnable struggle. Sleeping in them was not just about blankets and cloaks. It was about navigating a physical space that was designed to be harsh. It is a firmly known fact that the thick stone walls, often 2 or 3 meters across, were excellent at absorbing and holding the damp. In the summer, this made the castles pleasantly cool, but in the winter, it turned every single chamber into a vast walk-in refrigerator. Guards who were lying against the outer walls often woke to find a delicate lacework of frost blooming on the stones right beside them. The damp would seep into their straw, their boots would stiffen overnight, and their cloaks would pick up a permanent, musty chill. The very material that kept their enemies out seemed determined to gnaw the life from those who were within. Something unexpectedly practical shows up in the records of castle construction. Wall niches and alcoves were sometimes fitted with small, integrated fireplaces or wall stoves. These were narrow flues that were designed to carry heat from a fire on a lower level up into the upper rooms. The guards who were stationed in towers with such features were able to sleep a little easier, though the smoke would often leak through the cracks in the masonry. Imagine curling up on your straw pallet, hearing the faint crackle of a fire hidden deep inside the wall, and pressing your back against that single warm patch of stone. It was a form of comfort, yes, but a fleeting and uneven one. Warm shoulders, but still freezing toes. Specialists remain divided about how intentional this source of warmth actually was. Some argue that these wall stoves were designed for the comfort of the garrison, a part of their overall habitability. Others believe they were primarily structural, intended to carry heat up to the Lord's chambers on the floors above, with the guards benefiting only by a happy accident. Either way, their presence left its mark. Soot, stained niches, and scorched bricks, the vital clues that warmth did sometimes manage to seep into even the humblest of rooms. Picture the full sensory world of the castle architecture at night. The wind whistles through the arrow slits, which were designed to allow archers to shoot out, but which now act as perfect funnels for the icy draughts. The wooden shutters, when they were present, would creak against their hinges, banging softly in the storms. The ceilings would soar high above, losing precious warmth up into the dark, unseen rafters. The air smells of damp mortar and mildew, of straw that has been pressed for too long against the wet stone. You shift in your bedding, pulling your cloak ever tighter, but the castle itself feels alive, breathing its cold breath down your neck, sighing through its countless cracks. Curious solutions appeared over time. The guards would sometimes stuff rags or moss into the arrow slits to block the worst of the drafts, though their captains would scold them for risking the castle's visibility. Others would hang spare shields, or their own cloaks across the openings. A few castles even added wooden panelling along the lower sections of the walls, an extra layer of insulation against the pervasive damp. These boards would grow warped and dark with age, but to a shivering guard, even those thin planks must have felt like a gift from heaven. There's an odd tidbit that comes from the Scandinavian castles. Some of them had sleeping platforms built directly into the immense thickness of the walls themselves. The men would climb into these alcoves, which were carved out like simple bunks, enclosed on 3 sides by solid stone. These small spaces trapped body heat with remarkable effectiveness, though the condensation would often soak their bedding. Imagine sliding into a deep stone nook, the straw soft beneath you, your cloak pulled tight, your own body heat slowly filling the small cavity until it felt almost like a primitive, protective cave. The architecture also dictated the sound. The thick walls would muffle any outside noise, making the guardroom feel profoundly isolated, but they would also amplify the echo of every boot, every cough, and every snore inside. Sleep was never silent. You might lie awake for hours, hearing a single drip of water from a leaky roof echoing like a slow, relentless drum. The stone itself seemed to carry sound in strange and unpredictable ways, sometimes convincing the men that the whispers they heard came from nowhere, fueling both their dark jokes and their genuine fears of wandering spirits. The psychology of the space mattered too. The vast, empty halls could feel intimidating, their very emptiness making the cold seem somehow worse. The small chambers, on the other hand, offered a sense of comfort, even if they were cramped, because the collective body heat would cling to the air. The guards often preferred to sleep piled together in the corners rather than spread evenly across the floor, not only for the warmth, but also to shrink the perceived space around them. A corner, however drafty, felt less like a vast, empty void than the middle of a great echoing room. Superstition tied itself to the stone as well. Some men swore that certain walls were colder because they were haunted. Others believed that the alcoves held protective spirits. A guard might choose his sleeping spot with great care, deliberately avoiding a place where another man had once frozen or died, a decision born of both a rational fear and a superstitious memory. These individual choices shaped how the straw was spread and how the cloaks were laid down each night. Now, close your eyes and imagine yourself within this living architecture. You lie against a wall, its damp chill seeping through your cloak. Above you, the great rafters vanish into an impenetrable darkness. An arrow slit moans with the wind, rattling its wooden shutter. Your straw rustles as you shift, tucking your feet away from a creeping patch of frost on the floor. The stone that surrounds you is both your fortress and your foe, keeping you safe from your enemies, but pressing its cold relentlessly into your very bones. You sigh, resigning yourself to another long night inside these walls that were built to protect, but never to comfort. In the end, the castle's architecture was as much a player in the nightly struggle as the fire, the cloak, or the food. The guards survived, not in spite of the stone, but within its harsh terms, learning to use its alcoves, its shutters, and its niches as allies when possible, and cursing them when they were not. And so you drift into sleep once more, your dreams echoing with the sigh of the drafts through the arrow slits, the low rumble of the stone shifting in the cold, the very breath of a building that was designed to defend, but never to embrace. The immense, penetrating cold of the stone walls seeps into your dreams, and when you stir awake again, you find yourself thinking not of the unyielding walls or the dying braziers, but of people. You think of the comrades with whom you share every single bitter night. No man sleeps alone in a garrison unless he has been punished or is cursed with the lonely burden of a solitary duty. Here, warmth, much like laughter, is communal. The guardroom is not only a physical place of straw and cloaks, but a crucible where unbreakable bonds are forged in the quiet fire of shared discomfort. It is a firmly attested detail from historical records of garrison life that the men slept packed closely together. The primary reason for this was brutally practical. Body heat multiplies when bodies touch. A single row of guards lying shoulder to shoulder generated a cumulative warmth that no single cloak could ever hope to equal. Some chroniclers even described the men lying like sardines in a barrel, pressed so tightly together that one man's slightest movement would inevitably wake the next. It was a far cry from being elegant, but it kept their fingers and their toes alive through the long nights when a thick layer of frost lay on the windows. Something rather endearing appears in the anecdotal notes of the time. The guards developed small, personal rituals to make this forced intimacy more bearable. Some would mutter dark jokes just before lying down. "Don't steal my warmth, you thief," while others would swear loudly to keep their neighbors' muddy boots away from their faces. Imagine a chamber filled with a chorus of groans, of muffled laughter, of quiet curses, and then, eventually, the deep, collective sigh of surrender as the men arranged themselves in their human rows to face the oncoming cold. Scholars continue to debate whether this practice was driven more by raw necessity or by a deeper camaraderie. Some argue that it was an entirely practical arrangement, a simple survival tactic with no more profound meaning. Others, however, point to the powerful bonds that are recorded in the chronicles, the fierce loyalty, the shared inside jokes, the profound grief that was felt when one comrade did not wake in the morning as clear evidence that this closeness at night built an unshakable loyalty by day. It was likely both. The cold demanded it, but a deep friendship grew from it. Picture the full sensory world of a crowded guard room. The straw rustles under a dozen shifting bodies. The air is heavy with the musky scent of damp wool and human sweat. A man snores loudly at your shoulder. Another shifts restlessly at your back, pressing even closer. The heat builds slowly, unevenly, leaving one side of your body warm while the other is still chilled by the drafts. The room smells of stale breath, of damp cloth, and of the faint, lingering smoke from the fire. It is claustrophobic, yes, but it is also life-saving. There's a curious tidbit that survives from a Burgundian garrison. The soldiers had a custom of singing softly to themselves as they settled down for the night. One man would begin, and soon others would join in, until the whole chamber hummed with a low, tuneless chant. They claimed it lulled them to sleep and, more importantly, distracted them from the biting cold. Imagine lying half awake, your body pressed among your comrades, as a soft drone of human voices rises and falls like the sound of bees in a distant hive, until slumber finally, mercifully, claims you. Even the daytime quarrels would soften in this enforced closeness. Men who had argued bitterly by day often found themselves shoulder to shoulder by night, forced into a reluctant truce by the sheer power of the cold. There was a saying among some guards, "Stone makes enemies friends by midnight." Warmth became the ultimate peacekeeper, uniting even the bitterest of rivals in a grudging but necessary cooperation. This intimacy had its darker sides too, of course. Lice and fleas could spread with terrifying speed in such crowded quarters, and one man's persistent cough could quickly become everyone's sickness. The guards would joke about borrowing fleas from their neighbors, but the sudden outbreaks of disease that could sweep through a garrison were no laughing matter. Yet even with these considerable risks, very few ever chose to maintain their distance. A man who decided to sleep alone in a cold corner out of some misplaced sense of pride often paid for it with a sleepless, shivering night, while his companions, itchy but warm, managed to endure. The psychology of this comradeship cannot be understated. To fall asleep surrounded by your fellow guards was to feel profoundly protected. You knew that even if you slept too deeply, someone beside you might stir at a strange noise, or shake you awake, or even share an extra fold of their own cloak if you were shivering too violently. The cold may have been relentless, but the solidarity of the men made it survivable. Now close your eyes and imagine yourself in that room. You lie between two of your comrades, one snoring, the other muttering in his dreams. Your shoulders touch, your legs press against theirs, and a welcome warmth begins to pool where your bodies meet. You wrinkle your nose at the smell, and you grumble at the snores, but slowly your tense muscles begin to relax. The draft still creeps in through the arrow slits, but the human wall that surrounds you shields most of it away. You find yourself breathing in unison with those beside you, lulled by the gentle rhythm, soothed by the deep, unspoken knowledge that you are not alone. In the end, this comradeship was the castle's truest and most reliable blanket. The straw rotted, the fires died, the cloaks tore, but the simple, breathing presence of the men beside you always endured. Together, you outlasted the night. And so, as your eyes close again, you drift into dreams of a warmth that is not born of wool or of fire, but of shared breath and a shared heavy burden. It is the quiet, unbreakable bond of guards who learned that survival itself was, and always would be, a team effort. The memory of your comrades pressed shoulder to shoulder still lingers as you stir again, but this time your thoughts wander upward, up to the high towers and the wind-swept battlements, where the guards would often doze between their long, lonely rounds. Unlike the relative shelter of a guardroom, the open walls exposed the men to the very rawest of the elements. Yet, despite the danger, sleep would sometimes creep in regardless. For a castle watchman, drowsing on the battlements could mean a few moments of warmth stolen in precious fragments, or it could mean a swift, merciless death if he was discovered. It is firmly recorded that the guards were expected to remain alert and vigilant throughout their entire shifts on the walls. The chroniclers mention the harsh punishments for those who were caught asleep at their posts, some as severe as execution. A single lapse in vigilance could doom an entire fortress. Yet human nature is stubborn, and in the endless, mind-numbing monotony of a winter night, the eyes would droop. The men would lean against the cold stone of a merlon, slump down in the dark corners of the turrets, or crouch low beside the parapets with their cloaks drawn high over their heads. These were not long, deep sleeps, but stolen, fleeting moments, as fragile and as brief as sparks from a fire. Something rather curious shows up in the scattered accounts. The guards would sometimes use the residual warmth of the stone itself to ease their long vigil. Although the walls radiated a deep cold at night, during the day, they would absorb the heat of the sunlight. In the early evening, a sentry might lean his back against the sun-warmed masonry, enjoying a fleeting, precious pocket of heat as the darkness fell around him. Imagine pressing your shoulders to the rough stone, still faintly warm beneath the encroaching chill, and dozing for just a few minutes before the wind claimed that warmth once again. Scholars still debate how common these battlement naps really were. Some argue they were rare, dangerous indulgences, tolerated only in the quieter, more peaceful regions. Others suggest they were an unavoidable, even expected part of the watch, so long as one eye was cracked open now and then. Archaeological studies of the tower alcoves, with their telltale soot stains, hint that small fires or oil lamps were sometimes hidden there, creating small, sheltered corners where the guards could rest briefly between their rounds. Picture the raw sensory details of such a vigil. The wind howls over the top of the wall, pulling relentlessly at your cloak, snapping its hem against your legs like a whip. The snow drifts across the parapet, crunching loudly under your boots. You crouch down into a corner, your knees hugged tight to your chest, your cloak pulled up over your head like a small, inadequate tent. Your own breath fogs up the air beneath the fabric, warming your face slightly. The stone beneath you is hard as iron, the draft is relentless, but a deep, profound exhaustion drags at your eyes. You let them close, just for a moment, knowing that it is dangerous, yet feeling utterly unable to resist. There's an odd tidbit from a 15th century English castle. The sentries would sometimes stuff straw into the gaps of their helmets to make impromptu pillows, leaning forward to nap while they were still half-seated. They would joke about sleeping like owls, their heads bowed, their eyes hidden. The image is half comical, half desperate. A man clinging to mere scraps of rest while still pretending to be vigilant. Psychology played a powerful role too. Alone on a high wall, with the great, crushing silence pressing in from every side, the temptation to doze was almost irresistible. The guards would sometimes sing softly to themselves, stamp their feet in a steady rhythm, or mutter endless prayers, just to stay awake. But when the fatigue finally overcame them, they would curl up in the shadowed corners, trusting in their comrades, or perhaps just in sheer luck, to keep them safe. The sensory world of a battlement sleep is harsher than that of any guard room. Your cloak whips violently in the wind. Icy flakes of snow sting your exposed face. The cold stone beneath you slowly numbs your limbs. You have to shift constantly, waking half a dozen times an hour to stamp the feeling back into your toes. Your ears strain at every single sound, the creak of wood, the distant bark of a dog, the whistle of the wind that sometimes mimics human voices. Your dreams begin to blur into reality, until you are no longer sure if the noise you just heard was real or simply imagined. Superstition touched the battlements too. Some guards swore that sleeping for too long in the open air risked your soul wandering off, carried away by the powerful wind spirits. Others claimed that the dreams one had on the wall were prophetic, shaped by the vast, endless sky above. Whether a warning or a hope, these beliefs served to remind the men that sleep here was never ordinary. It existed on the precarious threshold between vigilance and vulnerability. Now, close your eyes and imagine yourself as that weary sentry. You crouch in the lee of a great stone merlon, your cloak wrapped tight, a little straw padding your helmet where it rests against the cold stone. Your eyes droop, your head nodding forward, until a sharp gust of wind jolts you fully awake. You listen hard, your heartbeat thudding in your ears, but you hear only the endless, lonely sound of the wind. You sigh, close your eyes again, and slip into another brief, shallow doze. The minutes stretch on, uncertainly, the cold gnawing at your fingers, but you endure. And when at last your relief comes, you stumble gratefully down the winding stairs, your cloak stiff with frost, your body aching, ready to collapse onto the welcoming straw. In the end, a battlement's sleep was always an uneasy one, never truly safe. It was survival, snatched in tiny, precious fragments, a constant compromise between duty and exhaustion. And as you finally curl up once more in the relative safety of the guardroom, the memory of the icy wind on your face follows you, a stark reminder that the very walls that kept your enemies out also kept the guards awake, sleepless, and forever at war with the night itself. The bitter memory of the icy battlements clings to you, but now your thoughts drift inward, to the strange, vivid dreams that so often haunted the guards when they finally collapsed into their restless sleep. The combination of fatigue, hunger, superstition, and the constant, stinging cold all served to twist the mind, shaping powerful visions that often felt as real as the cold stones beneath them. Sleep in a medieval castle was never deep or easy. It was fractured, filled with potent images born of pure hardship. It is a firmly observed truth, found in chronicles and personal letters, that men often recorded incredibly vivid dreams during the harsh winter months. The lack of steady warmth, combined with the constantly broken sleep from the watch rotations, left their minds in a fragile, heightened state. Their dreams became sharper, stranger, more deeply etched into their memory. Some saw great feasts laid out in glowing, warm halls, with steaming platters of meat and endless flagons of ale always just beyond their reach. Others dreamt of fires blazing warmly in a hearth, only to wake with their fingers numb, their breath misting white in the cold air. Hunger and cold wrote their own dark theatre in the landscape of the mind. Something oddly fascinating emerges from the folklore of the time. Guards would sometimes claim that their dreams had warned them of an impending danger. One account tells of a sentry who dreamt of dark shadows scaling the castle walls. Hours later, raiders were indeed spotted just outside the gates. Whether this was a pure coincidence or a form of sharpened intuition, his comrades believed him, whispering that the cold itself had somehow opened a window to prophecy. Imagine lying on your straw, shivering, and then waking from a powerful dream of flames or of spirits, unsure whether it was a true vision or just a fever. Scholars still debate how much stock to place in these dream reports. Some argue they were simply exaggerations, a form of storytelling after the fact. Others believe that the combination of sleep deprivation and intense physical stress genuinely heightened the men's awareness, making them more prone to these startling, intuitive insights. The truth may lie somewhere in between. Their dreams were half born of physiology and half fed by a deep-seated faith and a constant, gnawing fear. Picture the sensory experience of such a slumber. You lie curled beneath a thin cloak, the sharp straw pricking through the worn fabric. Your stomach growls, your toes ache, and at last you drift off. The dream comes swiftly. You are standing in a hall of brilliant light, a profound warmth flooding your skin, the sound of happy, laughing voices all around you. You reach for the food, for a cup of wine, but the vision flickers and fades. Suddenly, the great hall crumbles, its stones turning to frost, the laughter to a howling wind. You wake with a violent start, your body trembling, realizing with a pang of disappointment that the dream was nothing more than your mind desperately clutching at some form of comfort. There's a curious tidbit from a 14th century manuscript. A guard claimed that he was visited in his dreams by Saint Martin, who then spread his own holy cloak over him. The next morning, the guard found that he was noticeably less cold than his comrades, and he swore that it was no accident. Stories like these would have passed quickly through the garrisons, giving the men a fragile hope that holy figures might indeed intervene in their long, cold nights. The dreams also reflected the deep intimacy of the guard room. The men, pressed shoulder to shoulder, would often dream in parallel. One would stir, muttering of fire or of food, and another man sleeping beside him would whisper of the very same vision later on. The guards would joke that their dreams travelled like fleas, leaping from one man to the next in the dark. Yet beneath the humour was a genuine awe that their shared hardship could create such shared illusions, as if their very minds were huddled together just as tightly as their bodies. Superstition coloured their interpretation of these dreams. Dreams of warmth were considered good omens, said to promise survival through the winter. Dreams of ice creeping into the rooms were thought to foretell sickness or even death. The guards would whisper these judgments to one another at dawn, weighing them carefully against the day's coming duties. To dream of one's family was seen as comforting, but to dream of a black dog was considered a dire warning. The cold shaped both the images themselves and the meanings that were assigned to them. Now, close your eyes and imagine yourself sinking into such a dream. The wind howls outside, but in your mind, a golden hearth roars to life. Its sparks leaping, its heat soaking into your very bones. You stretch your hands out toward it, sighing in deep relief. But then the fire begins to fade, replaced by a creeping frost that races across the floor, climbing the walls, and reaching for your skin with its icy fingers. You wake, your heart pounding, your cloak clutched tightly around you. The others in the room stir and mutter, their faces pale in the dim firelight. The dream has left its own palpable chill behind. For the guards, these dreams were not mere fantasies. They were extensions of the cold. They were the echoes of their hunger, the reflections of their fear, and sometimes they were their only means of escape. A man who dreamed of warmth would carry that precious memory with him into his next watch, a fragile shield against the encroaching despair. In a world where the stone and the frost seemed unbreakable, these dreams gave a fleeting but vital illusion of light. And so you drift once more, half comforted, half haunted, into another vision born of pure exhaustion. The castle breathes around you, its draughts whispering into your sleep, its deep chill turning into the phantoms that stalk your mind. These dreams, strange and vivid, are as much a part of the long night as the fire, the straw, or the cloak, and like them, they help you to endure until the dawn. The strange, flickering dreams of fire and frost finally dissolve, and now you find yourself adrift at the very edge of the night, in that liminal space where sleep blurs into survival, and survival, in turn, blurs into memory. In all the routines and rituals you have witnessed the straw bedding, the heavy furs, the precious fires, the vital comradeship, the whispered superstitions. You can now sense the single, unifying thread that holds it all together. The sheer, unbreakable resilience of men who were forced to find their rest inside stone fortresses that were never meant for comfort. A medieval castle protected its people from arrows and from sieges, but it offered no inherent kindness against the relentless, invasive cold. The guards had to create that kindness for themselves, one long night at a time. It is a firmly established historical truth that while these castles were marvels of defense, they were profoundly poor shelters for providing warmth. The very same features that made them so strong, the thick stone walls, the high vaulted ceilings, the narrow arrow slits, also made them brutal places in which to sleep. Records from across Europe echo with the same weary laments. The wind pierces through the very walls, one scribe wrote, and no cloak nor fire suffices. For the guards, those laments were not mere words on a page. They were a lived, nightly reality. Every single night was a negotiation between the cold's impartial cruelty and the small human strategies that were devised to blunt its edge. Something unexpectedly and deeply human emerges from these scattered fragments of evidence, the vital presence of laughter that accompanied the hardship. Even in the deep chill of the drafty chambers, the guards found a space for humour. They would tease one another about snoring like pigs, they would joke about the fleas hopping from one cloak to the next, and they would sing rough, simple songs as they lay shoulder to shoulder against the cold. The cold may have been relentless, but their camaraderie turned it from an unbeatable enemy into a common adversary, something they could mock, endure, and eventually outlast together. Scholars continue to debate just how effective these various survival methods truly were. Did the furs, the curtains, the braziers, and the crowded sleep truly keep the men safe from the creeping death of hypothermia? Or did sheer, unyielding toughness play the greater role? Some argue that the constant adaptation, the changing of the shifts, the eating of fatty foods, The careful layering of wool was enough. Others insist that many men still fell ill or died, their legendary endurance perhaps exaggerated by later, more romantic accounts. The question remains unresolved, and perhaps that very uncertainty perfectly reflects the profound fragility of their long nights. Picture now the full sensory collage of a final medieval night. The straw rustles under a dozen shifting bodies. The air is thick with the smells of smoke and human sweat. A brazier glows faintly in the corner, its last embers cracking softly. The dogs shift and sigh among the sleeping men, their tails thudding softly against the floor. A draught sighs through an arrow slit, tugging at the heavy curtains, making the firelight stir. Children murmur in their sleep. Wives tuck blankets tighter around their husbands. The guards groan and stretch in the dark. The smell is layered and complex. Wool, damp stone, the sharp tang of garlic from supper, the musky scent of fur and oily lanolin. It is not a pleasant aroma, but it is deeply, undeniably alive. There's an odd and poignant tidbit from a later chronicle. One old guard, reminiscing on his life, swore that he missed those nights in the cold tower more than any grand feast. "For there I learned brotherhood," he wrote, "and the true warmth of men together." His words hint at what those long castle nights truly forged. Not comfort, but a profound and lasting connection. The cold pressed in so hard that the men discovered how to rely on one another utterly, in ways that few of us in our modern comfortable beds could ever demand. Superstition still lingered, even in those final, quiet hours before the dawn. A man waking to find a delicate tracery of frost on his eyelashes might cross himself quickly, muttering that the spirits of the night had passed by. Another, waking from a dream of warmth, might whisper to his neighbor that they would surely survive the winter. This belief, no matter how irrational, served as another layer of insulation, thin, fragile, but sometimes just enough to carry a man through. Now, close your eyes and imagine yourself at the very end of a long night watch. The horn has not yet sounded, but you can sense the dawn approaching. The fire has burned down to cold ash. The brazier is dark. Your cloak feels heavy with the damp of the night. The straw pokes at your side, and your toes ache with a familiar, deep cold. Yet, you can hear the steady, rhythmic breathing of your comrades, the soft sigh of a dog at your feet, the faint, sharp crackle of the frost as it begins to ease its grip on the walls. The worst is passing. And then, faint at first, a sliver of light slips through the narrow slit in the wall, grey, pale, but light nonetheless. You stir, rubbing your eyes, your breath still misting in the air before you, but the simple promise of the coming day warms you more than your cloak ever could. Soon the captain will call, the next routines will begin, and the castle will once again hum with the sounds of life. But for this one fragile, perfect moment, you know that you have endured another night without freezing. And so, the long journey through those frozen chambers comes gently to a close. You have walked beside the guards as they wrapped themselves in their cloaks, as they huddled under furs, as they shared their warmth with comrades and with dogs, as they whispered prayers against the spirits of the night, and as they dozed uneasily on the high battlements. You have felt the damp chill of the stones, you have heard the long sigh of the wind through the arrow slits, and you have smelled the ancient mingling of straw, smoke, and wool. These nights were harsh. They were unforgiving. Yet they were filled with the small, tenacious acts of survival that made life possible. As this narrative slows, let your own breath grow slower too. Inhale gently, as though you are drawing in the last warmth of a dying brazier. Exhale, as though you are releasing the long, deep cold of a stone chamber. The guards you have imagined are long gone now. Their nights have been survived. Their watch has ended. What remains is the quiet echo of their resilience, a silent reminder that even in the harshest of places, people have always found ways to endure together. The flicker of the fire fades now. The rustle of the straw softens into silence. The sounds of boots, of bells, of distant horns all drift away. All that is left is the steady, peaceful rhythm of your own breath, the comforting weight of a blanket, and the certain knowledge that the dawn always comes, no matter how long the night may seem. Let yourself sink deeper now, as though into a cloak heavy with fur, as though into straw that has been warmed by the bodies of comrades. The great stone walls of your imagination grow faint, dissolving into a gentle, peaceful shadow. You are safe, you are warm, and you are ready to rest. Sleep well, dream softly, and may your night be kinder than those endured by the guards in the cold towers of long ago.